Daenerys stood upon the wide, weathered battlements of Meereen, the wind toying with her silver-gold hair as she contemplated the rising sun's reflection on the turquoise waters below. The dawn was a promise of hope, a symbol of what she had built in Slaver's Bay, but also a horizon that stretched further than she had ever before dared to dream. There was Westeros, the cradle of her family's legacy, the place she had, until now, always believed she must conquer next. Yet as she listened to the bustle of Meereen's waking streets, it struck her that Essos itself remained fractious, troubled, and rife with old wounds she had only partially mended. A single question trembled in her mind. How could she hope to unify Westeros before ensuring that Essos, particularly the tumultuous free cities, were at peace, or at least aligned with her cause? That was the spark of a new strategy, one that would delay her westward voyage. Rather than sailing directly for King's Landing, Daenerys Targaryen decided she would first attempt the impossible, the unification of the free cities under her banner. Word of the Dragon Queen's new ambitions spread quickly within the high walls and smoky corridors of Meereen. Some of her closest advisors greeted her plan with shock, others with fervent enthusiasm. Tyrion Lannister, as always, provided a cautionary note, calling her plan the most daunting tapestry you've ever dared to weave, though he could not mask a certain spark in his mismatched eyes. Varys, the spider, merely offered a pensive nod, the corners of his lips curling as though he already saw threads of opportunities in the looming unknown. Grey Worm stood at attention, stolidly prepared to lead the Unsullied wherever she commanded, while Miss Andai's unwavering loyalty manifested in gentle words of encouragement. Ser Jorah Mormont, recently returned to her side after the heartbreak and redemption of his exile, looked at Daenerys with that undying devotion, caution bleeding into concern behind his eyes, even as he accepted her every desire. She resolved to begin by securing the closest city, Pentos, a place that had shaped her early life in ways she could scarcely articulate. Pentos was the coastal gateway to Essos from Westeros, a place of merchant princes and labyrinthine politics. Her fleeting memories of the manse where her brother had once plotted her marriage to Khal Drogo seemed to hover in the thick, perfumed air. Pentos was also in many ways the least resistant of the free cities. Its leaders, the Magisters, preferred to remain in the shadows of more powerful neighbors. Rumor said they might welcome the arrival of a Targaryen with 3 dragons and an army at her back, if only to protect themselves from Volantis and Braavos, the rival powers that overshadowed them. She sailed from Meereen on a bright day, her fleet of newly constructed ships, funded in part by the renewed trade in Slaver's Bay, a testament to her evolving rule. The Unsullied stood poised on the decks, disciplined silhouettes beneath flapping sails. Alongside them traveled a corps of freedmen volunteers, men and women who had once been slaves, but had pledged themselves to the breaker of chains, ready to fight, to die if needed, so that others might never experience what they had endured. Daenerys rode at the head of the fleet on a grand vessel trimmed in black and red, the colors of House Targaryen, her dragon circling in the sky above. Drogon, the largest and most unruly, soared ahead as if scouting the seas, flanked by Rhaegal and Viserion. Tyrion paced the deck, muttering about pirate attacks or storms, and occasionally reading from the battered books he had collected in Meereen's dusty archives. Jorah and Grey Worm hovered watchfully, ensuring her safety was never in question. Missandei sat often in Daenerys' cabin, drafting letters to the Magisters of Pentos in the Dragon Queen's name. She penned messages that were carefully balanced between cordial invitation and thinly veiled warning. If you wish peace and prosperity, you will find it under the wings of the dragon. Reject this offer, and you need only look at what happened to the masters of Slaver's Bay. The morning they reached the waters near Pentos, Daenerys stood at the prow of her flagship in silent awe. Pentos by dawn light was a tapestry of spires and domes, its noble manors sprawling behind high walls, its lesser districts an endless tangle of rooftops. The ocean breeze carried a medley of exotic spices, harbor stench, and the faint briny tang of morning tide. Yet she spotted no war fleet mustering to repel her, only a few merchant galleys scuttling aside, as if to clear the path for her armada. The Magisters had read her message. They had chosen not to meet her with steel or scorpion bolts, a sign of either agreement or deep fear. She made landfall with a retinue befitting her station. Grey Worm led the Unsullied in perfect ranks. Jorah and the Dothraki blood riders who had accompanied her now formed a ring of steel and leather. Tyrion and Varys took up strategic positions so they could observe any shift in the local crowd's emotions. Missandei was at Daenerys' side, carrying an ornate staff that symbolized the authority of the queen. Drogon's shadow flickered overhead, and the city's population, standing in the alleyways or gathered atop their roofs, cowered at the spectacle of a living dragon so close. The effect was not lost on her. She had learned the power of fear. She despised using it as a tool but knew its utility in negotiations. The first magister to greet her was Illyrio Mopatis, a face from her past she had once considered an ally. He looked both slimmer and more anxious than she remembered, though his mustaches were still curled into perfect arcs, and he wore the same glimmering rings that once clinked together whenever he gestured too eagerly. Bowing low, he welcomed the Dragon Queen to Pentos with lavish praise and offers of a sumptuous feast. Daenerys studied him, trying to decipher sincerity from opportunism, and found him as elusive as ever. "We are honored beyond measure to have you among us," he declared, his cheeks wobbling as he spoke. "All Pentos stands ready to show its gratitude for what you have accomplished in Meereen. Word of your liberations has reached even our shores. Though we prefer more peaceable ways of living, you'll find no cause for violence here." With his honeyed words, he led Daenerys and her entourage through the winding streets. She observed Pentos' contradictions. Manners of decadent luxury butted up against decrepit, stinking alleys. She saw children beggars, hungry and ragged, as well as lavishly garbed nobles swaying past them as though they were invisible. She recalled how she, too, had once walked these streets in near obscurity, her existence subject to the whims of her brother, the same brother who would have sold her to a savage for a crown. The memory stung, but she smiled graciously at the passing onlookers, who appeared more curious than hostile. Within the cavernous marble halls of Illyrio's manse, a lavish feast was spread. Roasted peacocks, spiced boar, fresh fish dripping in lemon butter, fragrant breads, and wines from Lys, Arbor, and beyond. Entertainment spilled through the halls. Dancers clad in silks, minstrels plucking curious tunes, and exotic beasts in gilded cages. Yet Daenerys did not allow herself to be swept away by spectacle. After all, she had not come to Pentos to revel. She had come to bend it. And Illyrio knew it too. The negotiations began swiftly, in a private solar where the walls were lined with tapestries of Pentoshi myth. Tyrion and Varys stood behind Daenerys, arms folded, watchful as Illyrio, and 3 other magisters she did not recognize took their seats across from her. To her left, Missandei placed a folded parchment atop the polished table, a list of the Dragon Queen's terms. She wanted Pentos to cease any involvement, direct or indirect, in the slave trade, to set free any slaves it still kept within its borders, to provide ships and gold for the next stage of her campaign, and to sign a pact of alliance with her. She was no longer content to be a silent partner to Pentos' intrigues. In return, she promised protection from the expansions of other free cities, a share in the spoils of any conquests, and trade privileges once she took the Iron Throne in Westeros. For good measure, she also offered the presence of her dragons and the Unsullied to ward off any city that might think Pentos an easy target. The magisters reacted much like Tyrion had predicted, with a medley of poorly concealed alarm and opportunistic excitement. They whispered among themselves, glancing repeatedly at Daenerys' calm, resolute expression. Illyrio, for his part, tried to maintain a jovial facade, but she caught the flickers of anxiety in his eyes. Finally, he leaned forward, rings clinking. "Your Grace, you ask for significant concessions. Some might say your demands border on an ultimatum. Yet we in Pentos are practical people. We see power. We admire it. We are open to forging new alliances, especially one as beneficent as yours." He let the words hang as though half expecting Daenerys to soften. When she did not, his mustache twitched nervously. "We only ask for certain assurances. These slaves, there are far fewer among us than in cities like Volantis or Myr. Their release can be organized. But we also rely on the coin from the trade that flows through our ports. If Pentos is to remain prosperous, we must be guaranteed a steady line of commerce. Will you grant us such a guarantee if we kneel?" Daenerys listened carefully, conscious of how easily she could slip into moral condemnation. Yet she had learned to negotiate with slavers and tyrants, and with aristocrats who played both sides. A new line of commerce can be built upon free labor, she said firmly, and upon the recognition that your city is part of something greater. You will be part of my alliance, and once I move west, my victory will ensure even greater trade opportunities, unspoiled by the old stigma of slave trafficking. She let the words crystallize in the hush. If you need a demonstration of my sincerity, I am prepared to give it. Any who seek to defy my terms will see the wrath of my dragons. Those who accept shall prosper, free of fear. It was the memory of her dragons, circling overhead, casting shadows on the city, that clinched Pentos' submission. The magisters made an elaborate show of signing her pact, lips tight with carefully masked misgivings. Illyrio bowed, showering her with effusive praise, promising her everything from gold to ships to a personally minted coin in her honor. For Daenerys, the first step in her new plan was complete. She refused to allow herself relief. There were 9 free cities total, each fiercely proud, each with its own labyrinth of internal politics. Still, conquering Pentos, through negotiation rather than open war, felt like a small but pivotal triumph. She spent the next weeks consolidating that new bond. Under her supervision, the city's small population of slaves was liberated. The newly freed men and women cheered her in the streets. Some merely shrugged off their shackles in dazed disbelief. Others wept at the feet of unsullied soldiers who had once been slaves themselves. The magisters, for their part, watched with forced smiles. Daenerys suspected that many of them viewed this as a passing inconvenience, that they still held out hope the old ways might be reinstated when she was gone. But she left a small contingent of Unsullied behind and stationed Rhaegal in a roost above Illyria's manse, where he perched with folded wings, a living symbol that Daenerys Targaryen was always near. With Pentos effectively under her influence, Daenerys turned her gaze to Braavos. There was no question that Braavos would pose a far greater challenge. The city had never been conquered, its founding mythic in scope, woven by escaped slaves. Braavos took pride in being the only free city that had spurned slavery from its inception. The mere mention of it made Tyrion rub his jaw, as though the thought gave him a headache. Braavos also commanded one of the most formidable fleets in the known world, boasted the Iron Bank, and had a martial tradition of water dancers and elite sellswords, who might rival even the Unsullied in cunning. Daenerys knew that if Braavos would not join her, at least it must be persuaded not to oppose her. But simply arriving with dragons and an army might be too forceful for a city that prided itself on subtlety and negotiation. So she decided to play a more delicate game. She returned to her fleet, the sails of the Pentoshi vessels now flying her dragon sigil beside the city's emblem. During the voyage, she consulted with Tyrion and Varys on how best to approach the Braavosi. Tyrion, hands clasped behind his back, offered a pointed reminder. The Braavosi bankers prefer gold to threats. Yet they are also not averse to making examples of those who default on their debts. Your father's legacy does you no favors there. The Iron Bank might recall the crown's old debts that remain unpaid. Daenerys stiffened at the reminder of the Mad King's lingering stains, but Varys quickly added a more optimistic note. Yet, the Braavosi freed themselves from the Valyrian slave lords. Their entire identity is built upon liberation from tyranny. In that, you have common ground. If you present yourself not as a conqueror but as a liberator, especially after what you did in Slaver's Bay, there may be a path forward. Daenerys latched onto that vision. She was not coming as the Mad King's daughter, but as a queen of the freed, the breaker of chains. She would stand on the same side as Braavos' own ancestors who had cast off their chains centuries ago. And if the bankers of the Iron Bank had reservations, she would offer them a seat at the table of the New World Order. Once she took Westeros, the crown's debts would be honored in full, and the Iron Bank would become indispensable to the realm. That was the logic she hoped would sway them. Their ships sliced through the sea's gray swells until the Titan of Braavos towered on the horizon, that colossal statue straddling the harbor's entrance. As they passed beneath it, Daenerys could not help the gooseflesh that prickled across her skin. She had read of it, heard it described in countless tales, but seeing it in person made her heart pound. The Titan's stone face glared defiantly at the sea, its stance a silent warning to would-be invaders. Riding a wooden deck below the Titan's feet, flanked by her men, Daenerys felt a curious sense of respect. Braavos had never allowed itself to be chained by any outside force. Could they accept an alliance with a dragon queen? She disembarked on the Hall of 1,000 Steps, welcomed by a delegation of purple-cloaked guards and city officials. The Braavosi were more subdued in their pageantry than the Pentos. They wore layered robes of muted grays and purples, their hair swept back to reveal solemn faces. The official who greeted her introduced himself as Mokaro, a senior envoy to the Sea Lord. He bowed courteously, but refrained from the elaborate flattery that Illyrio had used. "Welcome, Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, breaker of chains. The Sea Lord awaits you in the Sea Tower," he said in a formal tone. "Braavos is honored to host you, though I must caution that ours is a city of many voices. The Titan defends us, but so do our ideals." He delivered the last statement with an air of practiced neutrality. Daenerys thanked him and followed his lead across the city's network of canals, riding in a sleek boat rowed by a silent gondolier. The city seemed an intricate mosaic of waterways, stone bridges, hidden squares, and tall, twisting structures crowned with copper roofs. Braavos was a place of secrets. She spied masked courtesans drifting across little archways, red priests preaching on corner steps, men in flamboyant hats strolling with swords at their hips. From the boat's vantage, she admired the reflection of the city's lights rippling on the canal waters, the evening casting everything in a luminous haze. Inside the Sea Tower, a fortress perched on an artificial island, she met the Sea Lord in a grand but sparse chamber. He was a stately man named Volantis, hair streaked silver, wearing a simple black robe. Around him stood a handful of advisors, among them envoys from the Iron Bank, recognizable by their austere garments and calculating gazes. Tyrion and Varys took their positions behind Daenerys with Missandei at her side, and a handful of Unsullied at the door. She saw no open display of soldiers, though she suspected the corridors beyond might be bristling with Braavosi guards. "I bid you welcome, Your Grace," said the Sea Lord in a voice that resonated with calm authority. "We have heard of your feats across the narrow sea, the destruction of slavery in Slaver's Bay, the taming of dragons, the forging of alliances. My city is not one to be swayed by rumor alone, but we are not blind to the winds of change. Please, speak. What brings you to Braavos?" With that invitation, Daenerys articulated her vision. She spoke of her wars in Slaver's Bay, how she had broken the vile institution of bondage. She praised Braavos' founding myth, the city's proud refusal of slavery, drawing parallels to her own cause. She laid out her intention to unify the free cities under a single pact of mutual aid and liberation, to create a grand coalition that would stand with her when she finally sailed to Westeros. She offered Braavos a place of high standing in this coalition, praising their moral stance against slavery. "I do not come to conquer Braavos," she concluded, her voice carrying across the chamber. "I come asking you to help me conquer the future itself, to ensure no city ever again profits from shackling others. And in return, Braavos will have the backing of my dragons and armies, as well as the certain renewal of the crown's debt once I sit upon the Iron Throne." Nas. The Sea Lord's expression was inscrutable, but his advisors exchanged glances. Daenerys felt as though an invisible tide had shifted in the room. The Iron Bank envoy, a shrewd-faced man named Cass O'Brien, spoke next. "And if we refuse this union? If we remain neutral, as we often do?" he asked. The question was not combative but frank. "I would respect your neutrality," Daenerys replied, conscious of balancing firmness and respect. "But neutrality in a world where slavery still lurks has moral costs, and if you are not my allies, your enemies may use you for their ends. Should Braavos stand apart, and others see you as vulnerable, you might find yourself besieged by forces less inclined to honor your autonomy. I offer you the chance to stand with me, not beneath me." A hush followed. Daenerys waited. Volantis tapped the wooden arm of his chair, his brows drawn together in thought. "You speak of forging a just world," he said at length. "Braavos, above all, values freedom. Yet we also value self-determination. We fear entanglements that might dilute what makes us Braavosi. We have never bent the knee to any monarch. Still, your vision resonates with our founding. We are a city born of liberation. Let us not forget that." "No, native warats. It took 3 days of negotiations, held in smaller council chambers, with various factions of Braavos presenting their concerns. The Iron Bank demanded assurances on debt repayment, which Tyrion skillfully navigated, explaining how the crown's finances could be restructured if the bank offered its backing. The Braavosi merchant guilds questioned the economic ramifications of a new order in Essos, but Varys whispered pacifying hints of fresh opportunities once the Dragon Queen had united East and West. Daenerys herself spent hours each day in conversation, reminding these proud men and women that her cause was not to seize Braavos, but to ensure no city would stand alone when the final confrontation for the world's future took place. In the end, Braavos chose to align with Daenerys with a carefully worded compact rather than a direct pledge of fealty. The Sea Tower would remain sovereign, but Braavos would lend its formidable navy to her endeavors. She, in turn, promised not to impose on Braavos any foreign laws outside the universal abolishment of slavery, a principle they already upheld. The Iron Bank, for its part, pledged to fund her immediate needs in forging alliances with the other free cities, with a mutual understanding that once she claimed the Iron Throne, she would repay the accumulated Targaryen debt with interest. Before departing, Daenerys witnessed the forging of a grand seal in the shape of a 3-headed dragon and a titan, pressed onto a parchment that bore the signatures of the Sea Lord, the Braavosi Merchant Council, the Iron Bank envoys, and Daenerys herself. The second piece in the puzzle of her unification plan had fallen into place. She sailed onward to Lys, an island city renowned for its licentious pleasures, its bed slaves, and its cunning. The Lyseni were rumored to be beautiful, decadent, and sly in their politics. Their wealth depended heavily on the slave trade. Lys specialized in breeding pleasure slaves, men and women of exotic beauty, sold to the highest bidders across the known world. Of all the cities, Lys might be the most affronted by Daenerys' message. She prepared for stiff resistance. She arrived to a fortress of illusions. Lys sprawled languidly across a ring of low-lying islets, its pastel walls and turquoise waters shimmering under the sun. But behind that facade of idyllic beauty lay a labyrinth of unscrupulous deals and whispered secrets. Lyseni warships blocked her entry to the harbor, forcing her fleet to weigh anchor at a distance. Daenerys might have unleashed her dragons at the first sign of hostility, but she held back. She had promised to attempt peaceful unification first. So she sent word on a small boat, carried by her loyal scribes, requesting audience with the city's rulers. The reply was a curt refusal. Daenerys' jaw clenched in frustration, but Tyrion reminded her not to be hasty. "We can find other ways to speak with the powerful in Lys," he said. Varys proved instrumental. He had once trafficked in secrets throughout the free cities, and even in Lys he had little birds. By dusk, a masked Lyseni noblewoman boarded Daenerys' flagship under cover of darkness, a contact orchestrated by Varys. She introduced herself only as Mayera, and beneath her gauzy veil, Daenerys glimpsed a face of ethereal beauty. Yet the woman's voice was hard-edged, her accent lilting. She explained that the Triarchs of Lys had no intention of allowing the breaker of chains to step foot in their city, for her presence threatened their entire economy. But not all of Lys' nobility supported the Triarchs. A faction, led by more progressive merchant lords, had grown wary of how reliant their city was on the slave trade. With Braavos now aligned with Daenerys, Lys risked losing major shipping routes and credibility if it remained a bastion of slavery. Mayera offered a clandestine meeting between Daenerys and these merchant lords if she promised them certain guarantees of power once Lys Oldguard fell. Intrigue thickened the air. Daenerys, with Tyrion and various council, decided to arrange this meeting on a neutral islet away from the main city. Under cover of her dragons, who soared menacingly overhead, Daenerys led a group of Unsullied to an abandoned villa perched near the water's edge. Torches flickered in the sea breeze, revealing slender columns and open-air courtyards overrun by creeping vines. There in the courtyard, a half-dozen Lyseni lords and ladies gathered. Their silks and jewelry shone in the torchlight, but their faces were taut with anxious ambition. They eyed Daenerys warily, standing tall in her leather and black cloak, her hair lifted by the wind. Drogon flew overhead, sometimes letting loose a rumble that sounded like distant thunder. "We do not come to beg," Daenerys stated after brief introductions. "We come with an offer." Join the new alliance of free cities, abolish slavery and lies, and in return, you will be part of something greater. Resisting me means facing dragons and the combined armies of Pentos, Braavos, and Meereen, among others. But I do not wish to burn your city. I wish to save it from its own vices. Nah. The Lyseni exchanged pointed looks. They recognized the threat, but also the opportunity. A tall lord with silver-trimmed hair spoke up, calling himself Indarozal. The Triarchs are not easily deposed. They have their private armies, sellsword companies, and the backing of other cities that profit from Lyseni flesh. How can we overthrow them without plunging our city into chaos? Daenerys gave a measured nod, glancing at Tyrion, who stepped forward. The imp of Casterly Rock spoke with his usual mix of wit and persuasion. Chaos is indeed a ladder, but it can also be a pit. We can provide the muscle and the gold to ensure that once the Triarchs are removed, your city remains stable under new leadership. Your leadership. He paused. We only require that your new regime swears fealty to Queen Daenerys and outlaws slavery forever. Indarozal's gaze flickered from Daenerys to Tyrion. You speak so casually of dethroning our rulers, he said, a hint of reproach in his tone. Yet if your queen offers Lys a better future, I am willing to listen. Another lady, robed in shimmering purple, added, if we do this, we must ensure that the transition is swift. A prolonged coup would tear Lys apart and open us to invasion from Myre or Tyrosh. We'd be devoured. Daenerys sensed victory close. Then let us plan carefully, she said. My Unsullied can defeat the private armies. My dragons can quell any sellsword company too foolish to resist. You need only rally the people of Lys, especially the slaves who yearn for freedom. You will find that an oppressed population can become a fearsome ally once unleashed. Whoa. And so the conspiracy was formed. Over the next week, under the cloak of night, Lyseni dissidents ferried out to Daenerys' fleet for secret councils of war. They smuggled weapons to slaves, sabotaged the Triarch's guard posts, and spread rumors that the Dragon Queen would soon descend upon the city. Tensions escalated. Then, at dawn on the 8th day, Daenerys' ships advanced upon the main harbor, and her dragons soared in from the east. Horns blared from Lys ramparts. The Triarchs mustered their defenders, but confusion and sabotage had left them disorganized. Inside the city, slaves, many of them trained in stealth by the Lyseni conspirators, rose up. Street by street, they overwhelmed the Triarch's loyalists. On the harbor walls, the private soldiers retreated when Drogon unleashed a burst of fire on a catapult crew. Meanwhile, Grey Worm led the Unsullied in a tight formation, securing key points like the main gate and the city armory, clearing the path for Daenerys to enter Lys. The Triarchs, with nowhere to flee, barricaded themselves in a fortress near the city's center. Daenerys herself approached on foot, flanked by Tyrion, Missandei, and Jorah, while Drogon circled overhead, a promise of swift destruction. As the fortress gates swung open under threat of dragonfire, Daenerys stepped into the main hall. There she found the Triarchs trembling, 3 men in opulent attire, each one spattered with sweat and fear. Statues of Lyseni gods lined the marble walls, their carven eyes witnessing the downfall of the city's masters. The Triarchs attempted to bargain, babbling offers of gold and pearls, of alliances with other free cities. Daenerys let them speak until their throats ran dry, then said, Your reign is over. The slaves of Lys are free. The city belongs to its own people now. You can submit to my justice, or you can burn. Jorah's sword glinted in the sunlight streaming from above, and the Triarchs knelt in defeat. That very day, the conspirators took charge as the new Council of Lys. Daenerys oversaw the release of thousands of bed slaves and laborers. Many wept with relief. Others gazed in numb disbelief at the remnants of their shattered chains. The city was not bathed in fire and blood. By striking swiftly and in concert with internal allies, Daenerys had mostly avoided a prolonged siege or a slaughter. The transition was not without violence. Some of the old guard took up arms, or else tried to flee with hostages, but the newly empowered slaves and Unsullied quickly subdued them. In the aftermath, Daenerys stood upon a balcony that overlooked the city's radiant sprawl. She felt the warm, Lyseni sea breeze and exhaled. Another bastion of slavery toppled. Another city brought under the aegis of the dragon. Her vow to free all slaves, to end the vile trade in every corner of the world, now felt one step closer to fulfillment. She met with the new Lyseni Council. Endaro Zalmayera and others pledged their loyalty to Daenerys, promising to maintain the ban on slavery and to adopt a new system of governance that would not revert to the triarchy. "We are in your debt," Endaro said, bowing. "Yet we hope to flourish, not merely survive. We will uphold your cause, your grace. Let Lys be known now as a city of beauty and freedom, not of chained flesh." The next city was Myre, famed for its artisans, glassblowers, and unsentimental approach to commerce. Myre had a long tangled rivalry with Lys and Tyrosh, each city often fighting for control of disputed islands or trade routes. Hearing of Laia's abrupt fall to the Dragon Queen, Myre braced itself. The city was known for hiring sellswords and supporting the slave trade in more subtle ways. Daenerys did not wait for Myre to gather an army. She advanced with her unstoppable momentum, bolstered now by ships and funds from Pentos, Braavos, and Lys. Yet she took a cautious approach, sending envoys ahead to propose terms. Myre's merchant princes were flustered, unsure whether to fight or negotiate. Some favored employing the Golden Company, but rumor had it the Golden Company was now seeking new contracts, uncertain about crossing dragons and the combined might of several cities. Others thought to parley. At length, Myre's ruling council invited Daenerys to treat. Their city was not ringed by a might that could stand against 3 dragons and the armies of multiple allies. Many saw that the world was changing and wished to carve out a profitable place rather than resist. After some tense discussions, which Tyrion and Varys once again navigated, Myre agreed to join the alliance in exchange for trade advantages and protection from Tyrosh. The question of slavery was again the sticking point. But faced with the unyielding front of Braavos, Pentos, and Lys, each city now committed to the cause, Myre's rulers capitulated. They freed their slaves, some under duress, and grudgingly acknowledged Daenerys' authority. Another link in the chain undone. The momentum rippled across Essos. Other cities watched in fascination, uncertain whether to call Daenerys a liberator or a conqueror. Yet the cities that accepted her terms flourished in the aftermath. Freed slaves contributed labor without the destructive overhead of oppression. Braavos, Pentos, and Lys began establishing stable trade routes, and the Myrish craftsmen found new markets for their glass and textiles. With each city that joined, Daenerys' coalition appeared less like a rampaging horde, and more like a confederation of powerful states aligned behind one queen's banner. As the months passed, Tyrosh, Kuhora, and Norva succumbed in a similar pattern. Some required a show of arms, some surrendered upon hearing the roar of dragons over their rooftops, and others negotiated deals that favored them while still binding them to Daenerys' cause. In each city, slavery was abolished. In each city, a new alliance council was set up, sworn to aid each other if any external threat emerged. Daenerys, in turn, was recognized as the figurehead, the unifying queen who commanded dragons. Volantis proved the final and greatest challenge. The oldest and proudest of the free cities, Volantis still prided itself on its Valyrian heritage. Its black walls enclosed the ancient bloodlines that lorded over the rest of the city, as if it were their birthright. The city's economy was deeply intertwined with the slave trade. Volantis possessed more slaves than all the other free cities combined, or so the rumor went. By the time Daenerys turned her fleets and armies southward to the mouth of the Rhoyne, Volantis had already heard of her unstoppable march. Their triarchs furiously debated whether to join her or resist, summoning sellsword companies, forging alliances with the other slave cities outside the realm of Essos, places like New Keys and certain factions in Sotherios that might help repel the Dragon Queen's armies. But Daenerys had consolidated her power so thoroughly that even Volantis trembled. When Daenerys reached the towering walls of Volantis, she saw firsthand the magnitude of its defenses. Catapults and scorpions lined the ramparts. The city's formidable navy crowded the harbor. Yet behind the scenes, the Triarchs struggled to keep order among their own people. Word of the free cities to the north had kindled rebellion. Slaves whispered of the Dragon Queen who destroyed masters, of the Unsullied who had once been slaves themselves, of the unstoppable black shadow of Drogon overhead. Many slaves in Volantis performed essential tasks, manning ships, forging weapons, maintaining the city's infrastructure. If they revolted en masse, the Triarchs could be undone from within. Daenerys sent an ultimatum: open your gates, Free the slaves and join my cause. If you do not, your city shall burn." She had never been so direct, but this was the largest slave city in the known world, the original colonizer of Slaver's Bay, the ancient city that had tried to reconquer her newly freed lands. There was no room for half measures. Volantis raged, the Triarchs condemning her as a usurper, a foreigner daring to command them. But fear ate at them. She waited for their answer, her armies encamped outside the walls. Inside, Volantis slaves muttered, smuggled weapons, prepared to sabotage the war effort. Sellsword captains wrung their hands, uncertain if the Triarchs could even pay them if the Iron Banks sided with Daenerys. In the end, the Triarchs made a defiant show of closed gates. On Daenerys' command, the assault began. Braavosi war galleys attacked from the water. Lyseni archers fired upon the Volantine fleet, while Myrish engineers unleashed new siege engines that hurled flaming barrels at the towering walls. Daenerys rode Drogon, leading Rhaegal and Viserion in a fearsome onslaught. The Black Dragon's flames scorched the city's battlements, scattering defenders. But at her order, they avoided torching the districts where slaves and civilians huddled. She was not Aegon the Conqueror. She did not seek a charred ruin. Yet, the Volantine masters refused to yield easily. They had a deep well of resources, with wealthy nobles who could buy loyalty from certain sellsword bands. The siege stretched over weeks. Tyrion's council helped Daenerys maintain morale and keep the allied armies cohesive. Some cracks began to form. Certain Lyseni lords complained about the cost of the ongoing war. Marish merchants worried about lost trade. Daenerys grappled with the realities of forging a grand alliance. Each city had its own interests, and without swift success, old rivalries simmered. She labored daily to hold them together. The turning point came when, during a moonless night, thousands of Volantine slaves revolted inside the city. They overpowered guards, opened a lesser-known sally port, and signaled with hidden torches. Seizing the opportunity, Grey Worm led the Unsullied through the breach. They poured into the city's outer district, raising the banner of the three-headed dragon. The slaves, now armed and inflamed by hope, joined the Unsullied in capturing key strongholds. Sellsword companies either deserted or switched sides, unwilling to risk dragonfire. At dawn, Daenerys soared overhead on Drogon, seeing the city's defenders either pinned down or fleeing. The Triarchs themselves attempted to hole up behind the black walls, that ancient relic of Valyrian power. But Rhaegal's emerald fire melted the portcullis, and the Unsullied entered. One by one, the Triarchs were discovered cowering in their lavish estates. There, in the heart of Volantis, Daenerys declared the end of slavery once and for all. She stood upon the wide steps of the Temple of the Lord of Light, one of the largest temples in the city, its red walls shimmering in the smoky sunlight, and proclaimed that every man, woman, and child in chains was henceforth free. Crowds roared, half in jubilation, half in stunned awe. The old nobility looked on in horror, for the social fabric they had always known was unraveling before their eyes. But the city had fallen, and there was no reversing the tide. The last great slave city in Essos had yielded to the breaker of chains. In the days that followed, Daenerys oversaw the reorganization of Volantis. A new council formed, drawn from freedmen, moderate nobles who recognized the future had arrived, and officials from other allied cities. She insisted that the freed populace not descend into revenge killings against their former masters, a plea that had to be reinforced by the presence of the Unsullied and her dragons. There was some inevitable violence, but nowhere near the bloodbath that might have occurred without a strong unifying presence. With Volantis' surrender, every one of the free cities now either willingly or unwillingly stood behind Daenerys Targaryen. It had taken great effort, cunning negotiations, strategic warfare, and the unwavering loyalty of her armies and dragons. But the results were monumental. Essos, for the first time in its fractious history, was bound by a common cause. The Dragon Queens vowed to abolish slavery and prepare for her ultimate goal, taking the Iron Throne in Westeros. Daenerys lingered in Volantis for some months, ensuring the city stabilized, repairing damage, and laying frameworks for a new era of governance. She worked tirelessly with her allies to finalize trade pacts, shipping lanes, and mutual defense treaties, so that when she finally sailed west, Essos would not crumble behind her. She found that administration on such a scale tested her patience more than open battles, but she persevered, determined that her new realm not repeat the mistakes she had witnessed in Meereen's early days. And so the day came at last when Daenerys stood on the prow of a mighty fleet, now augmented by ships from every free city. Her dragons soared in formation above her, bigger and more fearsome than ever. Tens of thousands of Unsullied marched in disciplined ranks, alongside freedmen volunteers from Volantis Marish crossbow units, Braavosi water dancers, Lyseni archers, Dothraki screamers who had chosen to follow her across the sea and more. The might of Essos was hers, a coalition never before seen in living memory. Tyrion approached her side, shading his eyes against the sun as he gazed upon the vast armada. "You've done it," he said, a note of wonder in his usually sardonic voice. "You've truly changed this continent. Now we sail for Westeros with half the known world at your back." At Cersei, Daenerys felt a heady mix of triumph and trepidation. She had spent so many years imagining the day she would return to her ancestral homeland. Yet her greatest achievements now lay in Essos, the shattering of chains, the forging of alliances that had once seemed unimaginable. She closed her eyes, recalling the faces of the freed slaves, the children who would never again know a master's whip. With each city that had fallen into line, she had felt the weight of destiny grow heavier upon her shoulders. "We have changed Essos," she agreed quietly, "but have we changed ourselves enough to face what lies in Westeros? My father's throne awaits, along with the memory of his madness. The great houses will not kneel easily. Even with this alliance, war will come. And then there's the threat from the north, which we have only heard rumors of. If the dead truly rise in the lands of always winter, we must be ready for more than a mere political struggle." Tyrion gave a thoughtful nod, understanding the gravity of her reflections. "Your Grace, no one can truly be ready for the unknown," he said. "But you have proven your resolve. If you can unite the free cities, something none thought possible, then perhaps you can unite the Seven Kingdoms. And if the dead come, well, they'll have dragons to face." A light breeze rustled Daenerys' hair. She opened her eyes, taking in the sight of so many banners fluttering in unison. Banners bearing the sigils of Pentos, Braavos, Lys, Myr, Tyrosh, Kuhor, Norvos, and Volantis, all flanking the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. She sensed Jorah's watchful presence behind her, Grey Worm's disciplined posture, Missandei's quiet faith, Varys' strategic calm. These were her people. Together they had done what no conqueror, no champion, no saint had ever accomplished in Essos, a sweeping reformation that made old empires tremble. She placed a hand on the railing of the ship, feeling the gentle surge as the hull cut through the waters. Then, with a whispered command, she signaled for the fleet to set sail westward, into the wide sea that separated the continent she had changed from the one she intended to reclaim. The ships spread their sails, a thunderous cheer rising from the decks of 1,000 vessels. Her dragons roared, echoing across the waves like a herald of war, and perhaps of salvation. Daenerys lifted her chin, eyes focused on the horizon, where the watery vastness eventually broke upon the shores of Westeros. She imagined kings landing under the shadow of 3 dragons, the Red Keep trembling before a queen returning from exile. She pictured lords and ladies of the 7 kingdoms, each consumed by their petty wars and ancient feuds, suddenly confronted by the unstoppable reality of a united Essos. A queen who had mastered dragons, freed slaves, and dethroned tyrants. The next stage of her life was about to begin, and it would be the most perilous of all. In the distance, a gull cried above the masts, as though to urge her on. She thought of her brother, Viserys, who had so often screeched about waking the dragon, but whose own ambition had been too small, too cruel, too narrow. He had never dreamed of truly freeing anyone. He had only dreamed of wearing a crown. Daenerys had forged a better dream, a dream of liberation that had become an irrefutable power. Now, it would carry her across the sea and into the tapestry of Westeros destiny. Her conscience would be tested, her alliances strained, her dragons pitted against armies that might still rally for House Lannister, House Baratheon, or any who refused to bend the knee. She would need all her skill and resolve to navigate the deadly Game of Thrones. But for that, Daenerys felt prepared, more than ever before. As the hours passed, the coastline of Essos receded behind them, the waters turning deeper, the salt wind growing brisk. She felt a pang of loss, leaving behind so many who had placed their faith in her. Yet she also felt an ember of hope burning brighter. If she could carry forward that same spirit of unity, and deliver Westeros from its internecine struggles, she might create a new age where the freed cities of Essos and the 7 kingdoms of Westeros stood together. And if the rumored army of the dead truly existed, all the living would need to set aside old grudges and stand as one, under the banner of the queen who had already proved that unity was not a fool's fantasy. Jorah joined her at the prow, gazing at the horizon. He spoke softly. "You've achieved what even Aegon could not. In uniting Essos, you have shifted the entire balance of power in the world. Westeros will not know what's coming. They will see only the dragons at first, but in time, they'll understand that your power is built on more than fire and blood." Daenerys' lips curved into a thoughtful smile. "Fire and blood alone is not enough," she said. "I learned that through many trials. Compassion, justice, the will to break chains. That is what binds my armies to me, not simply terror. That is what unites these cities. It must be what unites Westeros too, or else the wheel will continue to turn, crushing the powerless underneath." She left him to his thoughts and climbed a narrow ladder to the quarterdeck. From that vantage, she beheld a sight that made her heart swell. The largest fleet the known world had ever seen, row upon row of ships carrying the best and brightest of Essos, men and women who believed in her. Drogon soared near the mast, his obsidian scales glinting in the sun. She could feel his presence through a bond both primal and profound. Rhaegal and Viserion flanked the ship in a symmetrical dance, their roars heralding each other across the waves. This was not how she had once imagined her conquest of Westeros, alone, with a small band of Dothraki or Sellswords. She was returning in glory, with half the world at her back. Yet her purpose transcended simple conquest. She was coming to save Westeros from itself, and possibly from the cold terrors that lay beyond the wall. Behind her, Tyrion approached, having finished a discussion with the ship's captain. He balanced himself on the shifting deck, a grin hinting at the corners of his mouth. "I've just been told by one of the Braavosi captains that we are making excellent time. The wind favors us. Perhaps the gods are cheering the unification of Essos, or perhaps they just want to see a grand spectacle in Westeros." Daenerys tilted her head toward him. "I appreciate all your counsel, Lord Tyrion. You once told me I needed to prove my worth as a queen beyond the might of my dragons. Do you think I've done so?" His mismatched eyes gleamed with genuine admiration. "Your Grace, you have surpassed my greatest imaginings. If the lords of Westeros don't kneel gladly, they're bigger fools than I thought possible. Though," he shrugged, "fools, as we know, abound in that land." She laughed softly, a sound borne away by the wind. For a moment, she let herself dream of the reception she might receive upon landing at Dragonstone, that ancient seat of House Targaryen. She had chosen it as her first foothold in Westeros, a place steeped in her ancestors' magic and history. From there, she would negotiate or conquer, step by step, as she had done in Essos. She thought of Winterfell, the North, and the stories of White Walkers. She thought of Casterly Rock and the Lannister seat, which Tyrion had so often described with equal parts scorn and longing. King's Landing, the capital that had once housed the Iron Throne forged by Aegon the Conqueror. This time, if she sat upon it, it would not be to subjugate the people but to lead them toward a better world, one that no longer needed or tolerated slavery, whether in name or in spirit. As the day wore on, the fleet stretched across the open sea, gulls and other seabirds trailing behind in hopes of scraps. Daenerys heard songs rising from the ships, the Dothraki chanting in their guttural tones, the freedmen singing old folk melodies from Volantis, the Braavosi humming tunes about the Titan's watchful eye, the Lacini playing flutes in intricate lilting rhythms. It was a chorus of many tongues and cultures, united now under one queen. The moment moved her deeply. She felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, unbidden but not unwelcome. She had fought so hard to achieve this. She had lost friends, lovers, advisors. She had walked through fire, literally and figuratively. Also, she could stand here, guiding her people, determined to break the chain of tyranny that had ruled the world for too long. She recalled her younger self, trembling at the thought of crossing the narrow sea, uncertain whether she could ever become more than a pawn in her brother's ambitions. She had once been sold to a Dothraki Khal, forced to adapt to an alien culture. She had once trudged across the Red Waste, leading a small band of survivors to Korth. She had walked into a pyre with dragon eggs and emerged unburnt, a mother of 3 living dragons. Every step of that journey had prepared her for this moment. The cost had been immeasurable, but the reward, an Essos united in freedom, was proof that her path held meaning. Darkness fell, and the stars blossomed overhead. One by one, lanterns were lit on the ships. Daenerys stood at the prow for a long time, watching the lights sway like a floating city in the night. She thought of the challenges ahead. Cersei Lannister might still sit upon the Iron Throne, or perhaps Euron Greyjoy, or some new force she had not foreseen. She would have to outmaneuver them, outthink them, and possibly unleash her dragons upon them if they refused to yield. She did not relish the idea of more war, but she accepted it as her duty. If Westeros was to be free of tyranny, if it was to survive the coming darkness, legend spoke of a long night returning, then she would do what was necessary. That night, in her cabin, she composed letters to the lords of Westeros, announcing her imminent arrival and the alliance she had forged in Essos. She invited them to parley, to recognize her claim as the rightful queen of the 7 kingdoms, and to join in the defense of the realm against any threat, living or dead. The letters were firm but offered a choice: bend the knee or remain an enemy. Tyrion approved of the tone, remarking that it was both regal and pragmatic. Varys quietly suggested dispatching ravens ahead, using contacts in White Harbor, Gulltown, and other coastal cities, so that the news of her unstoppable fleet might kindle both fear and hope in Westeros before she even set foot on its shores. Days turned to weeks at sea, and the tension within Daenerys coiled tighter. She often soared with Drogon, scanning the horizon for glimpses of land, or simply letting the dragons might remind her of the bond they shared. She corresponded with the allied city councils in Essos via swift ships, ensuring that the new freed cities would not descend into chaos or backslide into old ways. She trusted Grey Worm to coordinate with the unsullied garrisons she had left behind, and the new local leaders to uphold the laws that ended slavery. Yet her mind often drifted, imagining how she would present herself to the Westerosi. She had the might of Essos at her back, but she knew that winning hearts required more than an army. It required justice, humility, and a willingness to become part of Westeros' own tapestry, rather than an invader. Near sunrise one morning, a cry went up from the crow's nest. Land ahead. Dragonstone loomed on the horizon, its volcanic cliffs black against the dawn light, spires of ancient towers rising like petrified dragon's teeth. Daenerys' heart hammered. She had never set foot on Westeros before. This was her birthright, her father's castle. It was also the place where Aegon had landed centuries ago, starting his conquest with sister wives and dragons. Now, once again, a Targaryen with dragons was coming ashore, not alone, but with a coalition that spanned the breadth of Essos. She felt history's weight press upon her. Could she avoid her father's madness? Could she succeed where countless conquerors had eventually failed? The sun crested the sky, bathing Dragonstone in fiery gold. Daenerys commanded the fleet to circle the island, seeking a secure harbor large enough for her thousands of ships. She would land peacefully, claim the ancient seat of House Targaryen, and prepare for her next move. She stood at the prow, arms folded, Drogon's shadow crossing overhead. Tyrion was beside her, solemn. Missandei watched with wide, curious eyes, the foreigner to these shores who had come so far to see this moment. Ser Jorah wore a faint smile tinged with awe. Grey Worm, stoic but alert, coordinated the first wave of landfall. A hush seemed to settle upon the sea, as though the gods themselves paused to witness the return of the dragons. Daenerys stepped onto the stony beach of Dragonstone as the tide rolled in gently. The black sand crunched beneath her boots. She knelt, scooping a handful of damp sand, letting it trickle through her fingers. She felt the salt air kiss her cheeks, heard the distant screech of gulls mingling with the low rumble of her dragons. She closed her eyes, inhaling the tang of her homeland, the realm her ancestors had once ruled. When she rose, she was Daenerys Targaryen, the unburnt breaker of chains, queen of the freed cities, and rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Her gaze traveled up the winding path that led to the massive gates of Dragonstone Keep. She began to walk, her allies fanning out behind her in a procession that would soon fill every corner of the castle. Flashes of memory, or perhaps ancestral echoes, flickered in her mind, the stories of Aegon's Landing, the forging of the Seven Kingdoms, the vow that House Targaryen would one day return from exile. That day had come, but not merely as a Targaryen. She had returned as a queen shaped by Essos, by the forging of alliances and the breaking of chains, by the tears of slaves and the dreams of free men and women. She had become something new, a conqueror driven by compassion as much as by ambition, a ruler tempered by the countless trials that had tested her. Every footstep on Westerosi soil resonated with that truth. The castle gates swung open, echoing across the courtyard. Daenerys entered Dragonstone, a swirl of sea mist and morning sun greeting her, the courtyard silent except for the quiet scuff of boots. At that moment, she felt no fear. She had done the impossible in Essos. She had united the free cities under her banner. Now Westeros awaited. Somewhere beyond these walls lay King's Landing, Winterfell, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, the Westerlands, Dorne, the Iron Islands. They might resist her, or they might welcome her, but they could not ignore her. With dragons to her call and a continent behind her, Daenerys Targaryen had finally come home. She only prayed that when the storms of war broke, when the nightmares of winter descended, the realm would understand her cause and join it without further bloodshed. Yet if bloodshed was required, she would not shrink from it. She was not the scared girl who had once stood in Pentos. She was the queen who had reshaped a world. So she took her seat in Dragonstone's great hall, flanked by Tyrion and her council, the standards of House Targaryen unfurling in the sea breeze. Scouts and ravens were dispatched to every corner of Westeros, bearing the news. As the first day passed into night, Daenerys gazed out a high window at the rolling waves beneath the moonlight, her shoulders heavy with the burden of destiny. She recalled the faces of the freed, the hopes that had been pinned upon her. Essos believed in her, had bled for her, had torn down chains in her name. Now, as she embarked on the conquest of Westeros, she carried their faith with her like a lantern in the darkness. She promised herself she would not let them down. Drogon roared somewhere above, perched on a tower pinnacle, his silhouette outlined by the silver disk of the moon. Daenerys closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Across the sea, the freed city stood as a testament to what she had accomplished, a beacon that the old order could be shattered. Here in Westeros, she would strive to prove that the new order was not a passing fantasy, but a reality shaped by fire, blood, and above all, compassion. And at the heart of it all stood a queen, forged by trials in a foreign land, returning to claim her birthright with a power no one had foreseen. The united strength of an entire continent, free at last, marching under the wings of the dragon. The days that followed Daenerys' arrival on Dragonstone had a quiet, dreamlike quality, as though the island itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final wave of destiny to break. She walked the halls of the castle that had once served as her family's western stronghold, its walls shaped from volcanic stone, its towers crowned with dragon gargoyles that peered out to sea. Memories she could never have personally known seemed to drift in the dust of these corridors, echoes of Aegon's sisters, who had once walked these same passages, forging the Targaryen dominion that had lasted for centuries. Now she was on the brink of repeating history, but in a manner shaped by her experiences across the narrow sea. She was not here to subjugate in the old way, she was here to unify, and to prove that her new order, the one that had brought freedom to countless souls in Essos, could also save Westeros from itself. Her allies set about turning Dragonstone into a secure base. Grey Worm and the Unsullied scouted the beaches, establishing a perimeter of camps and watchtowers. Ships carrying engineers from Mar and Braavos unloaded siege equipment, lumber, and supplies. Dothraki scouts explored the craggy trails that wound up the steep cliffs, marveling at the sight of the ocean on all sides. On the ramparts, Lyseni archers stood vigil, their bright cloaks fluttering in the wind. Though Dragonstone was naturally defensible, Daenerys wanted to ensure it was more than just a fortress. It had to become the nerve center for her campaign in Westeros. Tyrion Lannister coordinated the logistical aspects with aplomb. He established ration schedules, ordered the storage of grain in Dragonstone's vaults, and dispatched scouts and envoys. His presence lent a particular irony to Daenerys' cause. Here was a Lannister, helping a Targaryen claim the Seven Kingdoms. But his loyalty was unequivocal. He would see her crowned, and in doing so also prove his own worth apart from his family's legacy. Varys, the ever-watchful spider, busied himself with an endless stream of coded messages and whispered meetings. In the gloom of Dragonstone's torchlit passages, he conferred with allies and informants who arrived by small boats in the dead of night, ensuring that Daenerys would know how each region of Westeros might react to her landing. Word of the Breaker of Chains' approach had already spread across the continent. There were glimpses of panic in King's Landing, rumors of tension in the Reach, a hushed fear in the north. Some lords, upon hearing that the Dragon Queen had united the entirety of Essos, were seized with dread and disbelief. Others nurtured quiet hopes that this new queen might bring much-needed stability, or justice, or even salvation from the rumored threat of White Walkers. Yet the old hatreds ran deep. Targaryen loyalists might welcome her, but they were few, scattered remnants of a bygone era. The majority of Westerosi lords had lived under Baratheon or Lannister rule for decades. They had no reason to believe a Targaryen would treat them gently, especially if they resisted her. And so Daenerys' main challenge was to offer them a compelling choice: unite willingly or suffer a war against a power that had already conquered half the known world. On the second morning, Daenerys stood atop one of Dragonstone's great turrets, gazing toward the mainland. The sea shimmered in the distance, reflecting a soft, pearly light. Missandei was at her side, calmly reading a new dispatch that had arrived by Raven. "Your Grace," Missandei said, her voice carefully measured, "the messages report that Cersei Lannister sits the Iron Throne. She has declared you a foreign invader, come to burn their cities with hordes of savages and monstrous beasts. She warns all loyal subjects to stand against you or face charges of treason." "Nay." Daenerys let out a slow breath, eyes narrowing at the horizon. She thought of Cersei, of the cruelty the woman had already shown in King's Landing. If rumors held true, she had blown up part of the city to eliminate her rivals. Tyrion had told Daenerys many times of his sister's capacity for ruthlessness. Even so, hearing that she was now labeled a monstrous foreigner stirred something hot and restless inside Daenerys, an echo of the old Targaryen fury. But she could not allow rage to guide her. She had won battles in Essos through cunning, negotiation, and unwavering purpose. She would do the same here, no matter Cersei's provocations. She had already sent ravens of her own, bidding the great houses of Westeros to come and treat with her. Now, she would wait a short while, see who might answer the call. She believed that at least some among them, perhaps the Tyrells, spurned by the Lannisters, or certain northern lords who recalled Ned Stark's sense of honor, might be open to an alliance. Whether from grudges against Cersei or a genuine sense of justice, there had to be those who would prefer an accord over immediate war. Still, Daenerys knew she could not wait forever. The longer she delayed, the more time Cersei had to rally forces, sow propaganda, and perhaps bribe or blackmail the wavering lords. Over the next few days, envoys arrived at Dragonstone, some openly, some in secrecy. The first was from Dorne, a representative of the surviving Martell faction who had long nursed hatred toward House Lannister for Elia Martell's murder. Though Oberyn Martell was dead, his name remained a rallying cry for Dornish vengeance. The envoy, a tall man with a hawk-like gaze, bowed before Daenerys and said that Dorne remembered the Targaryen ties from the time of Rhaegar, that they had not forgiven the Lannisters for the deaths inflicted upon their family. He promised that if Daenerys marched against Cersei, Dorne would rise in support, seeking retribution. Daenerys accepted the pledge with cautious optimism. She knew from Tyrion that Dorne's politics were fractious, but it was a start. Next came a small retinue from the Reach, wearing the sigil of House Tyrell. They brought word that Mace Tyrell was dead, and that Lady Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, had been forced into retreat. Cersei's alliance with Euron Greyjoy had inflicted serious damage on Tyrell forces. Now the Tyrell envoys sought Daenerys' help in reclaiming Highgarden and toppling the Lannisters. They spoke of how Cersei had turned the realm into a stage for her own brand of tyranny. Daenerys listened politely but also remembered what Tyrion had said about the Tyrells being opportunists, quick to seek advantage when the winds changed direction. Still, forging an alliance with them could ensure a large supply of food and men-at-arms from the fertile fields of the Reach. She promised that if they would join her campaign, and also embrace her new ideals, including the condemnation of slavery in all forms, she would restore them to their rightful place once she sat on the Iron Throne. The envoys agreed eagerly, though Daenerys suspected that to them, the talk of slavery meant little. They simply saw her as their best chance to recover power. She was also visited by emissaries from minor houses who had suffered under Lannister rule, or who bore grudges from the War of the Five Kings. Each arrival painted a more vivid picture of the fractures in Westeros. Daenerys began to realize that she might not face a united front. Instead, she faced a patchwork of allegiances that could be swayed if she showed strength and offered a compelling alternative to Cersei's brand of tyranny. Still, the question of the North weighed heavily on her mind. She had heard rumors that Jon Snow, the king in the North, had seized Winterfell from the Boltons and was now trying to gather his people against a threat from beyond the wall. White Walkers, the undead, an army of whites. Daenerys had little reason to doubt the possibility, given the strange events she had already encountered in her own life. If these rumors were true, then the North might be fighting a war far greater than the politics of King's Landing. But there had been no direct word from Jon Snow, nor from any northern envoys. Late one evening, as storms battered the shores outside, Daenerys stood by a tall window in the Great Hall, a place where the carved dragons twisted around pillars and stared down with gemstone eyes. She was dressed in a black gown, the Targaryen three-headed sigil embroidered in crimson thread across her chest. Her gaze flicked to the lightning that lit the sea through the arrow-slit windows. Tyrion lingered behind her, arms folded, pacing occasionally with restless energy. "We must consider the possibility that Jon Snow has no intention of coming south," Tyrion remarked, his voice low to avoid echoing in the vaulted chamber. "If the rumors of these White Walkers are true, he may believe your war with Cersei is a distraction from a far greater threat, or perhaps he simply cannot spare the men to march on King's Landing." Daenerys glanced back at him. "And if he's correct, if there truly is an undead threat in the north?" Tyrion sighed, his eyes flicking to the swirling shadows cast by the torches. "Then you may need to unite this realm faster than we anticipated. If an army of the dead marches south, it won't matter who sits the Iron Throne. All will be lost unless the living stand together." She nodded thoughtfully, memories of the chaos she had witnessed in Essos stirring. The idea of an implacable, inhuman enemy reminded her of the toxic shadow that had loomed over Slaver's Bay, although in a far more literal sense of doom. "Then we must find a way to speak with the North, to bring them into this alliance. I will not ignore the warnings while I fight Cersei. The living must stand together. I have seen what division can do. Cities weakened by internal feuds are easy prey for an overwhelming threat." Say. Yet communication with the North remained difficult. Ravens had been sent but no replies came. Tyrion suggested sending a specialized envoy, perhaps someone who could survive the journey and gain an audience with Jon Snow directly. Varys agreed that this might be wise, though it meant risking valuable allies. Daenerys, determined to show good faith, decided she would dispatch the fastest ship in her fleet, with a small retinue led by someone who understood the North. Jorah Mormont immediately volunteered, bowing and pledging he would do all in his power to arrange a meeting between the Dragon Queen and the King in the North. Daenerys looked into the loyal knight's eyes and saw a fierce devotion that had never wavered, despite all the heartbreak. She entrusted him with the mission. Jorah, with a handful of Braavosi sailors and a few unsullied for protection, set sail on a dim morning, the gulls crying overhead. She watched their ship fade into the gray distance, uncertain what fate the North would impose upon her old friend. In the interim, Daenerys could not remain idle. House Tyrell, the Martells of Dorne, and several lesser houses were pushing her to launch a swift campaign against Cersei before she could consolidate more power. Tyrion suggested a measured approach. Cut off King's Landing supply lines, demonstrate strength, and let the rumors of her unstoppable dragons and Westerosi armies spread fear among Cersei's allies. The Lannister approach to rule had always hinged on fear, but Daenerys knew how potent real terror could be when dragons were involved. In Essos, she had often used a show of might to avoid a prolonged bloodbath, reasoning that scaring the enemy into surrender was kinder than grinding them into dust. But here, the lines between friend and foe were less clear, and Westeros had never seen 3 dragons at war in living memory. They strategized in the council chamber, where a large painted table depicted Westeros in miniature, from the wall down to Dorne. Daenerys stared at the carved mountains and rivers, her fingertips tracing the rocky outline of King's Landing. Grey Worm stood by her side, resolute, while Missandei took notes on every detail. Lords from Dorne and the Reach hovered, eager to share their knowledge. Tyrion moved tokens around the table, representing armies and fleets. Varys leaned forward occasionally to murmur about rumored allegiances, houses, wavering sellswords crossing the sea, Euron Greyjoy's unpredictable movements off the coasts. Daenerys' first move was to dispatch part of her fleet to blockade the Blackwater Bay, effectively cutting off King's Landing's sea route for provisions. Led by a combination of Braavosi warships, Pentos galleys and Lyseni archers, this blockade would threaten the city with starvation if Cersei refused to bend the knee. Yet Daenerys also insisted on a code of conduct. No wanton slaughter of merchant ships carrying civilians, no flaming pots of wildfire hurled at fishing vessels. They would deny King's Landing the means of supply without punishing those who merely wished to survive. The captains of her allied navies found her principles curious. Assad rarely concerned itself with moral niceties, but they owed her their loyalty, and so they obeyed. Simultaneously, the Unsullied and Dothraki were sent to secure strategic positions along the Roserad, a vital artery of trade, leading from Highgarden to the capital. Many of the local lords along that route, long beholden to House Tyrell, were more than willing to open their gates to the Dragon Queen's forces. Others hesitated, uncertain. Daenerys traveled with this army part of the way, riding atop Drogon at times to show the might that had once put entire cities on their knees in Essos. Word spread of the black beast in the sky, so large that its wingspan cast a fleeting eclipse. Local peasantry came forth, frightened yet awestruck, bearing meager offerings of grain or fruit. Daenerys made sure to pay them fairly and forbid the Dothraki from pillaging. She was no foreign invader aiming to ravage the countryside. She intended to rule these lands, to earn their respect if possible, and to show them a queen could be both strong and compassionate. Tyrion recommended a subtle approach to King's Landing itself. "Starve them out," he said. "Encircle the city with your armies. Euron's fleet might still harass us, but if we hold the Roserad and the sea, King's Landing will be caught in a vice. Then you can demand Cersei's surrender. If she refuses, the city's own inhabitants may turn on her before they starve. One way or another, the throne is yours." No, Angie. Yet Daenerys could not help but recall her father's madness, his plans to burn the city with wildfire when he faced a siege. Would Cersei do the same? Or might she find some monstrous way to lash out at the population? Daenerys did not relish the idea of giving Cersei time to prepare dreadful measures. She remembered the people of Meereen, how they had huddled in fear when the Sons of the Harpy attacked, and how she had felt responsible for every life under her protection. She could not let the citizens of King's Landing suffer simply to avoid a battle. So she weighed her options, torn between the pragmatic blockade and a more direct action. In the midst of these uncertainties, she received a message from Olenna Tyrell herself, borne by a clever young courier who claimed to have evaded Lannister patrols. The letter was blunt. Lady Olenna insisted that Cersei would never surrender willingly, that she would destroy King's Landing herself before bowing to anyone. Olenna urged Daenerys to strike hard and swiftly, to use her dragons just as Aegon had done, and rid the realm of the Lannisters once and for all. The queen stared at the letter by torchlight, considering how fervent Olenna's words were. She recalled the face of the Queen of Thorns from earlier rumors, sharp-tongued, cunning, wise in the ways of war and politics. It was possible Olenna was correct. But Daenerys was not Aegon. She did not intend to conquer Westeros in a storm of fire. She resolved to keep the idea of an overwhelming assault in reserve, an option of last resort if all else failed. Days stretched into weeks as her armies moved methodically, capturing strongholds loyal to the Lannisters, forging alliances with houses that had suffered under Tywin's regime or under the brutal aftermath of the War of the Five Kings. The freed city's contingents, however, were not used to Westerosi terrain or local mores, and friction sometimes sparked between them and the local populace. Daenerys intervened, issuing clear decrees. No city or village was to be sacked, no local men or women taken as slaves or forced into servitude. She explained her guiding principle, that the entire reason she had come to Westeros was to bring an end to tyranny, not introduce a new form of it. This message spread among the common folk, who found it strange that a foreign queen commanded a massive army yet forbade pillaging or subjugation. Some peasants dared approach her when she made camp, asking if she really had freed all the slaves across the sea. She answered truthfully, yes. That was her greatest triumph, and she would do the same for Westeros. If any form of bondage still existed in hidden corners of the realm, she meant to root it out. Despite her best efforts, news of the approach of such a colossal army caused chaos. Some villages fled at the rumor of dragons, traveling deeper inland or hiding in the hills. Others tried to remain neutral, worried that if they showed any favor to Daenerys, they would later be punished by the Lannisters should the tide turn. But the tide would not turn, not with the unstoppable might Daenerys had assembled. Slowly, inevitably, the Targaryen banners spread across the Crownlands and parts of the Reach, while Dorne mobilized from the south, crossing the Red Mountains, with a force of spearmen, thirsting for revenge. Amid this slow tightening of the noose around King's Landing, Daenerys received the news she had been waiting for. Jorah Mormont had returned from the north, bringing an envoy of his own. She sent word to Tyrion to prepare a suitable welcome in Dragonstone's main hall. Tyrion posted double guards that evening, suspecting some northern retinue might arrive unannounced. Sure enough, near sunset, a lean boat rowed by northern men docked on the rocky shore. Jorah, looking travel-worn but resolute, disembarked with a tall, dark-haired man at his side, accompanied by a handful of grim-faced Northmen. Daenerys descended to meet them in the courtyard, flanked by Grey Worm and Missandei Deidari. She noticed the newcomer carried himself with a steady, sure stride, despite the mild limp she guessed was from some old battle wound. The wind whipped at his thick cloak, revealing the stark direwolf sigil pinned at his breast. "I am Jon Snow," he introduced himself, voice low but clear. "I bring greetings from the north, and a request for your help." He glanced at Jorah, who stood silently, then met Daenerys' gaze. She saw the earnest determination in his eyes, as well as a weight there, like a man who had carried too many burdens for too long. She led them inside, away from the cold sea wind, into the grand hall where torches cast dancing shadows across carved stone dragons. Tyrion was waiting, his expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. Grey Worm and several Unsullied took positions near the doors, while Missandei stood by Daenerys' side. There was no extravagance here, just the aura of a queen and her court. Jon Snow removed his cloak and made a slight bow, though not so deep as some lords might. His manners were plain, almost awkward, and Daenerys sensed that he was not accustomed to formalities. She invited him to speak. He explained in quiet, unvarnished words the situation in the north, how the Wildlings had joined forces with him after he allowed them safe passage through the wall, how the White Walkers had decimated Hardhome, how he had seen the Night King raise an army of the dead. As he spoke, his voice carried a conviction that transcended skepticism. Still, Daenerys could feel the tension in the room. Even Tyrion, who had heard rumors, appeared uneasy. White Walkers were the stuff of ancient legends. Yet here was this man, the king in the north, earnestly claiming it was real, and that an existential threat loomed over all of humanity. When he finished, Daenerys exhaled, her mind spinning. "If this threat is as dire as you say, why come to me? Why not to Cersei or the lords of the south?" Jon's jaw tightened, and there was a flicker of conflict in his gaze. "Cersei Lannister does not believe, and even if she did, I doubt she'd lift a finger to help the north. You, on the other hand..." He paused, glancing around. "You command armies unlike any Westeros has seen in centuries. And you've done what no one believed possible, united Essos. You also have dragons, which, from every story I've read, might be the only thing the White Walkers truly fear." Now in it, Daenerys remembered the chilling feeling she had whenever she encountered something truly unnatural. The warlocks of Korth, the black sorcery that had lingered in Slaver's Bay. The idea that something far worse existed to the north troubled her. She turned to Jorah, seeking confirmation. He stepped forward, speaking formally. "Your Grace, I've seen the north. The people there speak of the dead as a living army. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen the fear in their eyes and the tracks in the snow. They prepare for war, not against any living foe but a legion of corpses. I beg you to heed the king in the north's words." Nilin. Tyrion exchanged a look with Daenerys, silent communication passing between them. Finally, Daenerys folded her hands. "I will not ignore any threat to the realm. But you must understand, I also face an enemy in Cersei Lannister, who clings to the Iron Throne. If the living are to unite against these White Walkers, I must first secure peace in the south. A stable realm can better stand against any threat from beyond the wall. Perhaps if you join me in removing Cersei, we could then turn our combined strength north. Nay, Jon shook his head. We haven't the time. Winter has come, and with it the Night King's army. If the wall falls, every living soul south of it is in mortal danger, no matter who calls themselves queen. A flash of frustration lit Daenerys' eyes. She understood his urgency, but also the reality that Cersei would not simply stand aside because of an otherworldly threat. She glanced at Tyrion, who gave a subtle nod, as if urging her to consider a compromise. What would you have me do, Jon Snow? She asked, letting some of her impatience show. Abandon my claim, allowing Cersei more time to wreak havoc, while I send my armies north chasing a legend. His mouth pressed into a firm line, but there was no anger in his gaze, only an unshakable resolve that bordered on desperation. Send scouts. Let them see with their own eyes. Or come north yourself. We can show you proof. Once you believe, I pray you'll realize that every moment spent fighting each other is a moment wasted. Your cause is just. I know what the Lannisters have done, to my own family as well as to the rest of the realm. But the dead don't care about our quarrels. They will come for us all. Nail Harche. Daenerys heard echoes of her own words, once spoken in Meereen when she had tried to rally people against the brutality of the Masters. She understood the logic but felt cornered by the puzzle of timing. Tyrion quietly interjected, Your Grace, perhaps we can find a middle ground. We maintain the pressure on Cersei, but we also send a contingent to the north, some of our dragons, some of our armies. Enough to demonstrate our willingness to defend the realm without giving Cersei free rein. Daenerys considered. The notion of splitting her forces was risky. Yet she also realized that ignoring Jon Snow's plea could be a grave mistake if he spoke the truth. She studied him, noticing how he stood tall despite wearing plain leathers, how his eyes flicked between her and her guards. He did not appear cowed by the presence of Unsullied or by the knowledge of dragons overhead. She respected that. In Essos, men and women who displayed courage in the face of overwhelming odds had often become her most stalwart allies. She turned away, pacing a few steps between the carved pillars. If I do this, if I send dragons or soldiers north, Cersei might see it as weakness. She might strike at my armies in the Crown Lands or attempt to break the blockade. It could lead to more bloodshed among the living, at precisely the time we need unity. Jon inclined his head. I have no easy answer for that, Your Grace, but every day we tarry, the army of the dead grows. Daenerys sighed. The weight of decision pressed down. Finally she spoke. I will send one dragon north, along with a company of Unsullied and some of the Dothraki, under the command of someone I trust. She glanced at Grey Worm, who bowed without hesitation. And I will permit the king in the north to return, with any supplies or arms he needs from my allies. If you can bring me undeniable proof, something I can show the lords of Westeros, then I will call upon every city I have united, every ally, every soldier, to turn north and fight this threat. But if you cannot convince me, I must continue my campaign to dethrone Cersei. Jon nodded, relief flickering on his face. Thank you, Your Grace. I only hope that by the time we gather our proof, it won't be too late. Thus, a fragile accord formed between Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow, born not of warm friendship, but of shared necessity. Over the following days they discussed details with Tyrion and Varys. Jon explained that the only true way to convince the realm, and Daenerys herself, was to capture one of the undead, bring it south, and show it to all who doubted. The plan was desperate, borderline insane. Yet no one could conceive of a more convincing demonstration. How else could they prove that an army of walking corpses and White Walkers lurked beyond the wall? Daenerys agreed to dispatch one of her dragons, Viserion, to accompany Grey Worm, and a small strike team of Dothraki, Unsullied, and Northern warriors. Jon Snow insisted on leading them himself, explaining that his knowledge of the terrain would be crucial. Daenerys hesitated, finding herself strangely concerned for the safety of a man she had only just met. Yet she recognized the logic. Jon was the king in the north and his presence lent legitimacy to the mission. Without him, the wildlings and northern scouts might not even cooperate fully. So she consented. On the eve of their departure, Daenerys stood with Jon in a quiet courtyard of Dragonstone. Moonlight glinted on the black stone walls. Viserion perched on a nearby parapet, his white gold scales casting a faint shimmer. The dragon's tail flicked, stirring up dust and fallen leaves. Jon gently patted Viserion's scaled flank, his caution evident. "He's magnificent," he said softly. Daenerys observed them from a few paces away, arms crossed. "He is still young compared to Drogon, but his flames are no less deadly." Jon gave a wry smile. "I hope we won't need them too often. If we can slip in and out of the far north quickly, maybe we'll return without a fight. But hope and reality rarely align." He looked at her, his expression turning serious. "Thank you for trusting me with your dragon. I know what he means to you." "It's not just trust," Daenerys answered. "It's necessity. If this threat is as grave as you say, then you'll need every advantage to survive beyond the wall. Viserion can give you that." A hush settled. Daenerys felt an odd tension in the air, the kind that arises when two individuals share an unspoken understanding that they stand on the precipice of something far larger than themselves. Jon nodded, his dark hair stirring in the breeze. "I won't forget this." She found herself wanting to say more, perhaps to warn him about the danger of relying on a dragon's unpredictable nature, or to confide that she admired his resolve, even if she was not fully convinced. But words failed her. Instead, she offered a solemn bow of her head, and he returned the gesture. Then he turned, making his way to rejoin his men, preparing for the northern expedition. In the days that followed, the strike team departed. Grey Worm, dedicated and calm, led a small cadre of unsullied, their discipline unwavering. A group of Dothraki riders accompanied them, uneasy about the cold but eager for any challenge that promised glory. Jon and a handful of northern men guided them, forging an alliance of necessity that seemed improbable anywhere else in Westeros. Viserion took flight overhead, a pale glimmering shape that soared above the waves as the ship set sail for White Harbor. Daenerys watched from the battlements of Dragonstone until she could no longer see the outline of sails on the horizon. She wondered if this mission would truly bring back the proof she needed, or if it would end in tragedy. Meanwhile, the war against Cersei continued to smolder. Reports came in that Euron Greyjoy had raided allied ships along the Narrow Sea, sinking Pentos and Braavosi vessels that had been ferrying supplies. Daenerys seethed. She remembered Euron's earlier attacks on her forces near Lys and in the Stepstone. He was an unpredictable foe, cunning on the seas, and pledged to Cersei in exchange for whatever twisted arrangement they had forged. With half her fleet still blockading King's Landing, Daenerys needed to be careful not to overcommit. Yet Euron's raids could not go unanswered, or else it would embolden him further. At Tyrion's suggestion, Daenerys decided to strike Euron's fleet at its stronghold in the Iron Islands, or at least force him to retreat by threatening his home. Yara Greyjoy, who had thrown in her lot with Daenerys before only to be ambushed by Euron, had been captured, and her current whereabouts were unknown. But Theon Greyjoy had escaped. After a period of shame and self-loathing, Theon came before Daenerys, pledging whatever service he could to rescue his sister and end Euron's terror. Though once a ward of House Stark, Theon had lost the respect of the North by betraying Robb Stark. Daenerys neither trusted nor distrusted him. She simply saw a desperate man determined to atone, which reminded her of Jorah's own journey in some ways. She allowed him to lead a small expedition to the Iron Islands, with support from the Braavosi navy. Their mission: force Euron to return and defend his seat, thus alleviating his pressure on the Narrow Sea blockade. While these strategic maneuvers played out, Daenerys moved her main army closer to King's Landing, occupying the outskirts and farmland beyond the city's walls. Scouts reported that the city was tense. Cersei had raised new levies from the Westerlands, conscripting peasants and minor lords who feared the wrath of the crown. The Red Keep bristled with archers and rumored caches of wildfire. Daenerys from a distance could see the gates locked tight, the battlements lined with Lannister banners. But the tension on the streets was palpable. Many inside King's Landing were hungry, uncertain and frightened of the rumored Dragon Queen who had liberated cities half a world away. Could she be truly merciful, or was she another mad king's heir, bent on burning them all alive? One afternoon, Daenerys received an unexpected visitor. A single rider flying a white banner approached her lines. It was Jaime Lannister, the famed Kingslayer. He arrived with a small escort, unarmed except for a sword sheathed at his belt, which he offered to surrender. Daenerys agreed to parley, curious what Cersei's brother, and rumored lover, had come to say. They met in a field half a mile from the city's gates, Daenerys flanked by Unsullied and Dothraki, Jaime accompanied only by a page and a single squire. The tension was thick as they faced each other. Jaime's golden hand glinted in the sunlight as he dismounted. He bowed stiffly, eyes flicking to the sight of Drogon perched on a nearby hillock. "You are bolder than your sister," Daenerys said in greeting, her tone guarded. Jaime's voice was low, laced with a kind of weary resignation. "I've come because I want to avoid the city's destruction. We both know that if you attack King's Landing with your dragons, thousands will die. My sister will not bend the knee, no matter the cost. She believes she can outlast you." Daenerys studied him. She had heard much of Jaime Lannister, how he had killed her father to stop the destruction of King's Landing, how he had shaped the War of the Five Kings by taking Bran Stark's fall upon his conscience. She found herself remembering that her father had been mad, and Jaime had saved many lives. It was a complicated memory, one that stirred conflict in her. If Cersei will not bend the knee, then what does she propose? Jaime hesitated, as though carefully choosing words that would not betray Cersei's fury. She suggests a truce. You draw back your armies, release the blockade, and in return, King's Landing will not attack. She says we can both prepare for the threat from the north if that's truly real. Then once the threat is dealt with, we can resume our war. Then ain't true. Tyrion, who stood by Daenerys, let out a bitter chuckle. A truce? She'll use it to gather strength, hire more sellswords, and break it the moment it suits her. Jaime did not deny it. His expression was haunted. I know what my sister is capable of. But what I know more keenly is that if you force a siege, she's prepared to burn the city rather than surrender. I saw that look in the Mad King's eyes once. I see it now in hers. The difference is that there's more wildfire hidden beneath the streets than even Aerys had stored. Do you want another atrocity like that on your conscience? One. Daenerys' stomach churned. She had vowed never to become the type of ruler her father was, or to unleash devastation upon innocents. That was the reason she had tried to starve the city into surrender rather than storm it in a blaze of dragonfire. Now Jaime claimed that Cersei might replicate the very cataclysm Jaime once prevented. Missandei, hearing these words, exchanged a worried look with Daenerys. Tyrion's face twisted, torn between disgust for his sister and fear for the city. Even the Dothraki, who knew little of Westeros' history, sensed the dread in the air. Daenerys gave Jaime a measured stare. Why do you come to me with this warning, instead of standing by your sister's side? A flicker of regret passed over his features. I have stood by her side through many things, but I never wished to see King's Landing burn. I've already taken steps once to prevent that. I do not want to watch the city go up in flames again, or to become a kinslayer by stopping her. If there's a chance to end this without mass slaughter, I'm here to seek it. An uneasy silence settled. Daenerys understood that his presence meant there were divisions in the Lannister camp. If Jaime was willing to come forward, it might mean that not everyone in the city believed Cersei's claims of unstoppable victory. Tyrion let out a breath and looked at Daenerys, silently deferring to her judgment. The Queen's mind raced. A false truce could be a trap, yet ignoring the possibility of a diplomatic solution might push Cersei to do the unthinkable. Finally, Daenerys responded. Tell your sister that if she truly wishes to avoid the city's destruction, she must open the gates, allow my soldiers in, and kneel. If she does, I promise to spare her life and the lives of those loyal to her. I have no desire to be queen of ashes and bone. Jaime's face hardened. She will never agree to that. She will fight to the bitter end. Daenerys turned, glancing at Drogon, whose red eyes gleamed in the distance. Then what can we discuss? A truce means letting her remain on the Iron Throne, free to gather her forces and strike me when it's most opportune. I'm not so foolish as to accept that. Jaime opened his mouth, then closed it, looking grim. You are correct. I cannot promise anything else, unless you accept a stalemate, or you plan to rely on these rumors of undead to force an armistice. But that seems tenuous. Tyrion, stepping forward, addressed his brother. What if we show her the truth, Jaime? If we truly do have a white, the proof of the threat in the north, could that possibly make her pause? It might buy us time at least. Now. Jaime shook his head, though uncertainty flickered in his gaze. I don't know. She might see it as yet another opportunity to entrap you. But if you intend to present a living corpse, or whatever it is, you might get a temporary reprieve, a false alliance. I've seen enough to suspect that truth alone won't sway her. But perhaps fear of the undead might. Natron Volcare. Daenerys stood quietly, remembering her promise to Jon Snow, wondering if that plan, mad as it seemed, might be the only means of avoiding a catastrophic siege. She sighed. You may return to the city. Tell your sister I will not assault King's Landing by fire and blood if she will meet with me to witness the threat from the north. Let us hold a gathering in a neutral place, with lords from across the realm. We'll show them what truly awaits beyond the wall, so that all the living might unite. Jaime looked doubtful, but also faintly hopeful. I will tell her, he said. Though I warn you, my sister will never yield easily. As he departed, Daenerys felt the weight of the realm pressing upon her again. She turned to Tyrion, voice hushed so the others wouldn't overhear. This is all perched on a razor's edge. One mistake and tens of thousands could die in dragonfire or wildfire. We could have freed half the world only to watch the other half burn. Tyrion nodded grimly. Welcome to Westeros, Your Grace. Time slithered by as Daenerys waited for news of both her expedition north and Theon's mission to the Iron Islands. She spent her days visiting the outskirts of King's Landing, meeting small folk who slipped through the blockade or who ventured out to see the so-called breaker of chains with their own eyes. Some brought stories of Cersei's cruelty or lamented the rising cost of bread. Others spoke in hushed wonder about the queen who had destroyed slavery in Essos. Daenerys tried to reassure them that she meant them no harm, offering glimpses of her more merciful nature. Yet she knew rumors and fear often spoke louder than truth in a city as vast and battered as King's Landing. To ease tensions, she set up a makeshift hospital camp outside the city walls, staffed by healers from Essos and volunteers from among the local septus. The wounded and sick from both sides could come, provided they laid down arms. Many did, and while some Lannister soldiers distrusted the presence of unsullied guards, they eventually recognized that the care was genuine. This small gesture began to erode the black and white demonization Cersei had spun, even if only a little. It reminded Daenerys of what she had achieved in Meereen, forging fragile ties among people who had once stood on opposite ends of the whip. But Westeros was, if anything, more stubbornly set in its ways. One late afternoon, as she checked on the hospital tents, Daenerys noticed a small girl lying listlessly on a cot, clutching a ragged doll. The child's face was pale with fever, her cheeks hollow from hunger. Daenerys crouched and asked her name, but the girl only stared, fear and exhaustion in her eyes. One of the local healers explained that the girl had lost both parents in a riot inside the city. A wave of pity and anger hit Daenerys, anger at Cersei for letting her people starve, at the lords of Westeros for their endless feuds, at the realization that a child's world could be so cruel. She beckoned to Missandei, who handed her a small clay cup filled with broth. Daenerys gently coaxed the girl to sip. The child drank in trembling swallows, as if tasting kindness for the first time in ages. In that moment, the queen felt a renewed sense of responsibility. She had toppled tyranny in Essos, but her vow to protect the innocent applied no less in Westeros. If she stormed King's Landing, the child might perish in the flames. If she allowed Cersei to hold power, the child might perish from hunger. It was a terrible dilemma, one that gnawed at her heart. She resolved that she would find a way to save as many lives as she could. That was her duty, her calling, the burden she had accepted when she rose from the ashes in the Dothraki Sea and declared herself the breaker of chains. At last, a raven came from the north, penned by Jon Snow in his blunt style. He reported that they had ventured beyond the wall with Tormund Giantsbane, a wildling ally, and encountered the undead. They had successfully captured a white, but in the battle, they faced a White Walker and its horrifying servants. Several of their party were lost, including some Dothraki who fought bravely despite the cold. Worse, Viserion was gravely wounded during the skirmish. Jon wrote that the dragon still lived, but had been gashed by the icy spear of a White Walker and would need time to heal. The mention of her dragon wounded enraged Daenerys, but the letter ended with a promise. They had the proof they needed, sealed inside a crate that would be brought south as soon as possible. The news that Viserion was still alive brought some relief, but the knowledge that the White Walkers had nearly killed one of her children chilled Daenerys' blood. Another raven soon followed, bearing more urgent tidings. The dead were advancing, faster than the wildlings had anticipated, and the Night King's powers seemed to grow with each passing day. Jon insisted that the realms of men must see the captured White and unite now. Winter was no longer coming. It was here, blanketing the north in storms of relentless cold. Daenerys knew then that the dream of a swift, surgical conquest of King's Landing was slipping away. The realm did not have time for a protracted siege. If the living were to stand a chance, a truce might be the only solution, no matter how dangerous. She consulted with Tyrion, Varys, and Missandei. They decided on a meeting place, the Dragon Pit in King's Landing, an ancient ruin where Targaryen dragons had once been kept centuries ago. The high walls might provide a neutral space large enough for both sides to gather and witness the truth of the undead. They would bring the captured White there, and the lords of Westeros, including Cersei, if she dared, could not deny what they saw with their own eyes. Invitations were dispatched. Daenerys demanded safe passage for her entourage, and threatened dire consequences if Cersei betrayed her. Days passed with agonizing slowness. Daenerys' stomach churned as she recalled how badly things had ended in Slaver's Bay when she had tried to negotiate with the Masters. She hated parleying with tyrants who harmed their own people. Yet if the alternative was a war among the living, while the dead marched south, she had no choice. At last, word came that Cersei had agreed to the meeting, though not without pointed warnings of traps from both sides. Jaime, if the rumors were correct, had helped persuade her that refusing would only drive more lords to Daenerys' side. Daenerys arrived at the Dragon Pit with a retinue that included Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, several Dothraki, and a handful of notable allies from Dorne and the Reach. Jon Snow arrived from the north with the crate containing the White. Davos Seaworth accompanied him, as did several wildlings. The tension in the air felt like a taut bowstring. High above, the sun burned through a haze of dust. The Dragon Pit itself was a shell of its former glory, broken walls, collapsed domes, scattered dragon bones bleaching in the light. This was the legacy of her ancestors, now reduced to rubble. Then came Cersei's entourage. She arrived in regal attire, black and gold gown, a thin crown on her head. Jaime walked at her side, expression somber. The mountain loomed behind her, an undead colossus in Kingsguard armor. Qyburn flitted around with an eerie curiosity, his pale face unreadable. A host of Lannister and Gold Cloak guards stood bristling at the perimeter. Daenerys felt her pulse thud as she beheld the queen who had so long occupied the Iron Throne. Cersei regarded Daenerys with cold contempt, her green eyes glittering like shards of glass. Jon Snow stepped forward, speaking of the threat from beyond the wall. His words were direct, lacking the flowery rhetoric of a courtier. He motioned for the crate to be opened. Sandor Clegane, commonly called the Hound, kicked it over, letting the monstrous thing inside scramble out. The White, a decaying corpse with white, ragged eyes, lunged at Cersei and her retinue, jaws snapping, arms outstretched. Only a chain around its torso kept it from ripping into flesh. Gasps and screams erupted. Even Cersei recoiled, her face taut with horror. Qyburn approached it with a twisted fascination, while Jaime went pale as a ghost. Daenerys watched them, remembering how even in her life she had rarely seen something so unnatural. The White snarled, an embodiment of raw, inhuman malice. Jon demonstrated how fire could repel it, setting part of it aflame. He also showed how dragonglass or Valyrian steel could destroy it permanently. Cersei stared, at first disbelieving, then with dawning fear. The hush that followed was profound. Tyrion spoke into that silence, urging all present to recognize that none of their feuds mattered in the face of an enemy that neither slept nor felt pity. Cersei's lips twisted. Even if this is real, what would you have me do? Surrender my kingdom to this foreign queen, in the hope she'll help us fight these monsters. Jon Snow's voice rang with urgency. We need every man, every weapon, to stand against the Night King. We ask only for an armistice. Set aside our enmities until the undead are destroyed. Afterward, we can settle who sits the Iron Throne. Ah. Daenerys stepped forward, meeting Cersei's icy gaze. Join us in this fight or stand aside, but if you seek to attack my forces while we march north to defend the realm, I swear you will face fire and blood. For a moment, the entire gathering seemed to hold its breath, eyes flicking between the two queens. Cersei's fists tightened at her sides, and she glared at Jaime, who was watching her with a desperate plea in his eyes. Finally, Cersei forced a brittle smile. Very well. I will order my armies to stand down while you fight the great war in the north. Prove to me that you can defeat this threat and I will help you. We will settle our differences once the dead are gone. Until then, a truce. Nat way. There was a wave of wary relief among Daenerys' allies. Tyrion, however, looked unconvinced. He knew his sister's capacity for lies. Yet, for now, what else could be done? The living needed to stand as one against the dead or die separately. No sooner had the meeting ended than Cersei departed in haste, her retinue trailing behind. Daenerys and her allies gathered around the smoldering remains of the White, each weighed down by the knowledge that while they might have secured a truce, trust was another matter entirely. Jon Snow looked uneasy, and Davos Seaworth muttered that it was too easy for Cersei to claim cooperation. Jaime, in passing, whispered to Tyrion that he feared Cersei had no intention of honoring any deal, that she was already planning to hire the Golden Company from Essos to crush Daenerys once the undead threat either passed or wiped out her enemies. The truth or falsehood of that rumor would only be revealed in time, but Daenerys realized they had little choice except to make haste for the north. The Night King would not halt his march. If the living were to have any hope of prevailing, they needed to gather all their armies, Westerosi and Essosi, on the fields of the north. That was a daunting prospect, requiring organization on an unprecedented scale. Once again, Daenerys found herself repeating what she had done in Essos, forging alliances of necessity, bridging cultural divides, and urging her followers to see a common cause. But now, instead of city-states, she had feuding great houses. Instead of wealthy slavers, she had cunning lords and ladies who distrusted a foreign invader. And overshadowing it all was the hush of winter, blanketing the realm in cold. She resolved to lead the bulk of her armies north. If Cersei attacked King's Landing from behind, so be it. Daenerys would not permit the realm to fall to the undead for the sake of a throne. Tyrion worried this left her flank exposed, but she reminded him that the freed cities remained loyal. A garrison of Unsullied and sellsword companies from Myre and Pentos could hold the crown lands in check. And if Cersei betrayed the truce, the world would see who had put personal ambition above the survival of mankind. The moral victory might not stop an army, but it could sway the lords still on the fence. The next weeks became a blur of preparations. Wagons of dragonglass were shipped from Dragonstone to White Harbor and Eastwatch by the Sea, to be crafted into weapons. Blacksmiths toiled day and night, forging arrowheads and spear tips. The Dothraki and Unsullied, ill-suited to the cold, received warmer furs and boots, courtesy of local weavers who scrambled to meet the demand. Daenerys commanded that every city and stronghold along the way provide shelter and food for her troops, with the promise of fair payment. Even so, winter's scarcity loomed. They had to move fast, or starvation could claim as many lives as the undead. Daenerys herself longed to ride Drogon and simply fly north, scanning the land for signs of the enemy. But she needed to manage her forces and ensure that the freed city's contingent stayed coordinated. The ramifications of her uniting Essos still echoed. Braavos ship captains, Myrish crossbowmen, Lyseni archers, Pentos cavalry, they had never faced an enemy like this, nor the biting cold of northern winters. She spent long hours conferring with their commanders, relaying advice gleaned from the wildlings and the Night's Watch on how to fight the dead. She found her sense of purpose renewed in these tasks. There was a clarity in confronting an inhuman foe. Politics, as vile as it could be, faded before the question of survival itself. At last, the Grand Army marched. Long columns of Unsullied Dothraki horsemen and Westerosi bannermen, loyal to Daenerys or to allied houses, wound their way across the continent. Dornish spearmen traveled north, cursing the cold yet steadfast in their resolve. Warriors from the Reach, hardened by the recent wars, marched alongside them. Volunteers from the Crownlands who had grown disillusioned with Cersei followed the new queen. As the columns passed small towns, people gawked at the sheer diversity of the force. Dark-skinned archers from the Summer Isles, former sellswords who had joined Daenerys in Essos, pale Braavosi water dancers practicing stances in open fields, Dothraki screamers practicing horseback archery at a full gallop, and Unsullied phalanxes disciplined as stone. Above them soared Daenerys' two uninjured dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal, occasionally landing to rest or to fish in frozen rivers. Viserion was still recovering in Winterfell's courtyard under the care of healers who knew little about dragon biology, but Jon's letters indicated the beast was regaining strength daily, flapping his wings in an attempt to fly again. Despite the slow pace of the march, a certain unity began to form. Soldiers exchanged stories around campfires, comparing their homes and customs, building uneasy camaraderie. Daenerys spent her nights visiting different encampments, checking on rations, morale, and discipline. She was no longer the young woman who had once stumbled through the Red Waste, uncertain of her own future. She was a queen who had forged alliances across half the world, and these men and women looked to her for leadership in the face of unimaginable horror. Tyrion often walked at her side, offering wry observations, or riding a sturdy pony near the front lines. Varys glided through the tents, gathering whispers of any sign of disloyalty or sabotage. In the distance, the northern sky grew ever darker, heralding storms of snow and ice. It was nearly midwinter by the time Daenerys' vanguard approached the wide plains south of Winterfell. There, Jon Snow and Sansa Stark had assembled what men they could from the north, along with wildlings from beyond the wall, who had retreated south to defend the living. The sight that greeted Daenerys was somber. The open fields had been turned into makeshift fortifications, trenches lined with sharpened stakes, piles of dragonglass weaponry stacked in caches. Thousands of ragged northern soldiers, many wearing patched furs and carrying old swords, stood at attention, or tried to. Some stared in awe at the approach of the queen's immense host. Others murmured uncertainly, recalling old grudges against Targaryens. Daenerys glimpsed the battered towers of Winterfell in the distance, their roofs laden with snow. Jon Snow rode out to greet her, accompanied by Sansa and a small group that included Brienne of Tarth and a collection of northern lords. Sansa Stark's auburn hair was streaked with silver from the falling snow, and her posture was regal but wary. Brienne, tall and stoic, looked at Daenerys with frank appraisal, as though judging if this new queen was worthy of trust. Jon, dismounting, made a respectful bow, though Daenerys could sense relief in his eyes. "We are glad you've come, Your Grace," he said. "The dead are not far behind." She swung down from her horse, snow crunching beneath her boots. The northern wind bit into her cheeks, and she felt the dryness in the air. "We made haste," she replied. "I brought every ally I could muster, every weapon that might matter." "How fares Viserion?" "He is healing well," Sansa answered, stepping forward. There was a polite formality in her tone, as though forcing herself to be cordial to a rival queen. "The Maester says he's begun flying short distances within the courtyard, though he can't yet sustain long flights. I imagine seeing winter for the first time has been a shock to him." Daenerys allowed a small smile. "Dragons adapt quickly. Thank you for caring for him." She took a moment to study Sansa's face, recalling how Tyrion had once been wed to her. Sansa's eyes held a caution born of betrayal, but also an undeniable strength. Daenerys recognized that hardness. It was the strength of a survivor. Jon guided them back toward Winterfell's gates. Soldiers parted to let the queen's retinue pass. Dothraki riders exchanged suspicious glances with northern men who had heard tales of savage horse lords. Unsullied, silent, and disciplined, marched in neat ranks behind their queen. Despite the swirling tension, Daenerys felt a flicker of hope. This was what unity looked like, however uneasy, when faced with a common threat. If they could stand together long enough, perhaps they stood a chance. Within Winterfell's walls, the courtyard bustled with activity. Blacksmiths hammered dragon-glass arrowheads, stable hands tended to horses, wildlings sharpened axes. Viserion lay curled near a corner of the yard, a band of healed scar tissue around his flank. He lifted his head with a growl at Daenerys' arrival, then recognized her scent, letting out a squeak of greeting. Daenerys approached slowly, laying a hand on his scaled snout. She felt a wave of relief to see him alive, though her heart burned with rage at the memory of how close he had come to death at the hands of the White Walkers. Her dragons were more than weapons. They were her children. Once settled in the Great Hall, Daenerys joined Jon, Sansa, and the other northern lords in a council of war. A large table, hastily constructed from planks, held a rough map of the north. Jon indicated the known positions of the undead. Reports suggested they were moving south from Eastwatch, having overwhelmed the few watchers there. The Vale under Lord Royce had sent some knights, but not nearly enough. The Umbers and Karstarks, once torn by internal strife, had tried to rally men but faced the unstoppable approach of the dead. Each update painted a bleaker picture than the last. A hush fell over the hall as they realized how thinly they were stretched. Daenerys recounted the forces she'd brought, and proposed forming a defensive line around Winterfell. If the undead crashed upon them, they would either hold or die. Jon suggested deploying part of the forces to the west, near the last hearth, in hopes of slowing the enemy. But Sansa pointed out that any force sent there would likely be overrun quickly, leading to more undead bolstering the Night King's ranks. The conversation turned grim. Even with 3 dragons, once Viserion recovered, and the might of Essos, the odds felt terrifying. The undead were unceasing, tireless and commanded by White Walkers who possessed powers beyond normal comprehension. Yet, Daenerys refused to yield to despair. She recalled the earliest days of her conquest in Essos, how impossible it had seemed to challenge the entire institution of slavery. She had not succumbed to fear then, and she would not now. She pressed her allies for solutions for any advantage. The blacksmith Gendry, newly returned, spoke of forging more weapons from dragon glass. Tormund offered strategies for luring whites into kill zones with fire. Tyrion and Varys planned supply lines so that the army could maintain its strength. It was a gargantuan task, but with each tactic and plan, a spark of hope emerged. Daenerys realized this was what she did best, rallying people to a cause greater than themselves. While war preparations escalated, there were personal tensions to navigate. Many northern lords distrusted the presence of so many foreign troops in their homeland. Some scoffed at the notion of a queen from across the sea. Yet as they learned of her victories and saw the discipline of the Unsullied, many softened. The Dothraki proved more difficult to reconcile, for their warlike customs clashed with the North's stoic traditions. A brawl or two erupted, only to be broken up by the presence of unsullied officers. Daenerys met with these lords, listened to their grievances, and reminded them that none would survive if they squabbled among themselves. Gradually, grudgingly, an understanding took shape. One bitterly cold night, Daenerys ventured out to the godswood of Winterfell for a moment of solitude. The ancient weirwood, with its carved face and blood-red leaves, watched silently as flakes of snow drifted to the ground. She remembered how the Dothraki believed certain places had powerful spirits, and she wondered if the old gods of the north watched her now. She knelt at the base of the heart tree, feeling the hush, trying to find clarity amid the chaos. She missed Ser Jorah, who was out scouting with a group of northern rangers. She missed Missandei, who was back in the castle, likely transcribing the day's developments. Sometimes, a queen needed a moment alone with her thoughts. She was surprised when Sansa Stark approached, her footsteps muffled by snow. Sansa did not kneel or speak immediately. She simply stood there, her breath misting. At length, she said, "You're different from what I expected." Daenerys rose, brushing snow from her knees, turning to face the Lady of Winterfell. "In what way?" "I grew up hearing songs of the Targaryens, some about their beauty and courage, others about their madness and cruelty. I expected someone more like Cersei claims you to be, but you're neither a monster nor a saint." Sansa's tone was careful, as though choosing every word with precision. Daenerys felt a faint smile tug at her lips. "No, die. I'm just a person trying to save the realm. If I fail, nothing else will matter." "Nyan." Sansa nodded, her expression distant. "Jon believes in you. That means a great deal to me. He doesn't trust easily, especially after all he has been through. He gave up his crown to stand beside you. That speaks louder than any vow." Daenerys hesitated, sensing a deeper subtext. "He's a good man. His devotion to the North is obvious in everything he does." Sansa studied Daenerys for a moment, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Then she spoke quietly. "I hope you understand him too. He's risked everything because he believes in something bigger than pride. If you ever betray that, or if you use him for your own ends, I will never forgive you." Daenerys returned her gaze, unflinching. "I have no intention of betraying Jon Snow or the North. I came to save the living, not destroy them. If we survive this winter, I want peace for Westeros, not more betrayal." Sansa's posture relaxed slightly, though her wariness did not entirely fade. Then let us hope we both live to see that peace. She turned, her cloak swirling behind her, and departed, leaving Daenerys alone beneath the ancient heart tree once more. The days passed in a flurry of activity and watchful waiting. Scouting parties reported sightings of whites moving through the forests, small skirmishes that ended with the dead reanimating fallen men. Snowstorms raged, slowing any attempt to mount a coordinated offensive. Daenerys tried to keep her armies fed and warm, but supplies dwindled. The freed cities had never known such severe cold, and many of the Westerosi soldiers muttered about returning home. Discipline kept them in line, but Daenerys could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. Had they come all this way to freeze in a land not their own? At last, the horns sounded. 3 blasts, the traditional Night's Watch signal for the approach of the others. The undead were near. Winterfell's defenses snapped into action. Men rushed to the battlements. Fires were lit, dragonglass spikes positioned. The dragons roared from the courtyard, beating their wings in agitation. Daenerys donned thick white furred armor, her silver gold hair braided tightly. She climbed atop Drogon, feeling his muscles coil beneath her. Rhaegal stood ready beside them, while Viserion, still not fully healed, let out a testing growl, uncertain if he could fly. Jon, wearing black armor and a fur cloak, rode out with the cavalry to set up positions beyond the walls. Dothraki screamers followed, chanting war cries that echoed over the snowy plains. Unsullied marched in perfect formation, spears bristling under the dull gray sky. Daenerys soared aloft on Drogon, scanning the horizon for any sign of the enemy. The cold wind tore at her face, and below she saw thousands of men forming lines, torches glinting in the twilight. And then, at the edge of sight, the dead came. The sheer magnitude of them was staggering, an unbroken tide of pale shapes advancing through the swirling snow, silent except for the clacking of bones and the rustle of ragged flesh. White walkers rode among them on skeletal horses, icy spears in hand. Daenerys' heart seized. She recalled the battles in Essos, the siege of Meereen, the slavers' armies. None of that compared to this. The horde of whites marched without fear or fatigue, unstoppable as a glacier. A single chilling shriek cut the air, a monstrous cry that made Drogon roar in response. From the ranks of the dead burst a pack of giant whites, once living creatures now twisted into undead beasts. Daenerys directed Drogon forward, unleashing a torrent of dragonfire that lit the snow like molten gold. Whites were incinerated in swaths, their shrieks lost in the roar of the flames. Yet the horde kept coming, scrambling over the scorched remains of their fellows. Dothraki riders swept in, aurochs flaming with dragonglass, slicing through the undead with fierce skill. Unsullied phalanxes braced spears, letting wave upon wave of whites impale themselves. Swords flashed, arrows whistled, screams pierced the howling wind. Above it all soared Daenerys, raining dragonfire whenever she could, mindful not to scorch her own troops. Rhaegal, ridden by no one, followed her lead, unleashing green plumes of flame that carved wide arcs of destruction. The White Walkers scattered, wary of the dragon's wrath, but Daenerys saw them brandishing ice spears. She remembered Viserion's wound, how close she had come to losing him. She maneuvered Drogon with caution, never lingering too long in one spot. Jon Snow, on the ground, led a force of wildlings and northern knights in a flanking maneuver, attempting to encircle part of the undead. Their efforts met with partial success, but the dead did not break or flee. They fought until destroyed, and for every white cut down, another took its place. Soon the battlefield became a chaos of swirling snow and blood, lit only by the flicker of torches and dragonfire. Daenerys rang with a cacophony of steel on bone, men shouting in terror or victory, the guttural snarls of the undead. In the midst of this maelstrom, she glimpsed the Night King, a tall, gaunt figure with ice-blue skin and a crown like a ray of horns. He sat astride a zombified horse, gazing impassively at the carnage. A White Walker handed him an ice spear. Daenerys' heart hammered. She remembered how easily such a spear had downed Viserion. She urged Drogon higher, fear twisting in her gut. The Night King's gaze followed her. The next instant he hurled the spear with supernatural force. Drogon twisted aside, but the spear grazed his flank, sending a jolt of pain through Daenerys as she felt her mount convulse. She clung to the reins, cursing the biting cold. The spear fell away, shattering in the distance, but Drogon's wound bled, a crimson stain across black scales. Fury ignited within Daenerys. She circled around, hurling a column of flame toward the Night King. He raised his arms, and frost erupted in a swirl, meeting the dragonfire in a violent clash of elements. Steam and shards of ice rained down. The Night King rode back, momentarily forced to retreat, but his expression remained eerily calm, as though nothing could truly stir him. Daenerys realized with mounting dread that they might kill thousands of whites, but if they could not strike down the Night King and the White Walkers, the dead would only rise again. Hours of brutal fighting ensued. Men and women fell, only to be resurrected if not promptly burned. The Dothraki, so formidable against living foes, found themselves overwhelmed by the tireless dead. Unsullied ranks held, but the press of whites threatened to encircle them. Tyrion and Varys, from atop the battlements, coordinated the flow of reinforcements, sending archers where they were needed most. Jon Snow broke off with a small group, trying to push through the chaos to find the Night King, remembering that killing him could destroy all whites he had raised. But the White Walkers guarded their master, engaging Jon's group in lethal, frigid combat. Icy swords clashed with Valyrian steel. The air crackled with frost. Near dawn, the tide began to shift. Daenerys, bleeding and exhausted, spotted a cluster of White Walkers flanking the Night King. She descended with Drogon in a desperate move, unleashing a concentrated inferno of dragonfire. Rhaegal joined from the side, doubling the conflagration. The White Walkers' icy protection shattered, and the ground beneath them melted into a steaming quagmire. For a fleeting moment, the Night King was exposed. Jon Snow burst forward through the blackened remains of whites, long claw in hand, eyes blazing with determination. Daenerys saw him raise the sword, its Valyrian steel reflecting the swirl of dawn's light. But the Night King swiveled with inhuman speed, meeting Jon's blade with an ice-bound staff. Frost and steel collided, and the shockwave threw both men back. A White Walker lunged at Jon, only to be cut down by Gendry's dragonglass hammer, which splintered the creature into shards of ice. Jon scrambled to his feet, lunging again. The Night King parried effortlessly, each blow resonating with unearthly power. Daenerys urged Drogon to close in, hoping to finish the creature with fire, but she had to fend off other whites that clambered up Drogon's legs, trying to drag him down. The struggle reached a fever pitch. Just when it seemed Jon would be overwhelmed by the Night King's strength, the ground shook. Rhaegal, half-blind with fury, crashed into the Night King's position, spewing flames. The White Walkers reeled, and for a heartbeat, the Night King was forced to dodge, stepping away from Jon. In that narrow window, the King in the north dove forward, driving Longclaw straight at the Night King's chest. A shrill piercing sound erupted, a mix of cracking ice and a deep, resonant wail. The Night King staggered, the blade of Valyrian steel emerging from his back. Jon twisted the sword, and shards of hoarfrost exploded outward. For a heartbeat, everything seemed still, the Night King's face a mask of shock, then fury, then emptiness. Then the ancient terror shattered into a rain of ice fragments, cascading to the ground in a crystalline heap. Every white within sight convulsed, many collapsing instantly. White Walkers, deprived of their master, crumbled. A wave of silence swept the battlefield as the undead army disintegrated, the magic animating them snuffed out like a candle flame. Men stared in disbelief, weapons sliding from numb hands. Daenerys, still atop Drogon, felt an almost physical jolt, as though the entire world exhaled. The Great War had ended in a single stroke, the final blow delivered by Jon Snow with the help of dragons. Shafts of dawnlight pierced the clouds, revealing a battlefield littered with bodies, charred remains, broken weapons, and drifting snow. Many of Daenerys' warriors lay among the fallen, including noble houses of the north, Dothraki bloodriders, unsullied Dornish spearmen, and men of the Reach. Tears blurred her vision as she dismounted, searching through the carnage for survivors, her boots crunching on frozen gore. Everywhere she looked, the cost of victory was etched into the land. Tormund Giantsbane knelt over a fallen wildling friend, tears freezing on his cheeks. Grey Worm leaned on his spear, blood streaming from a wound in his side. Tyrion stood near the battlements, face ashen, as if he could not quite believe they were alive. Daenerys finally found Jon Snow near the crumpled remnants of the Night King's armor, panting, wounded, but very much alive. His face was smeared with soot and blood. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither spoke, the enormity of what had happened weighing upon them. Then Daenerys sank to one knee beside him, pressing her forehead against his. Around them, the dawn broke fully, bathing the shattered battlefield in a pale golden glow. The long night had been averted, at least that was what Daenerys hoped. The cost had been immeasurable. Yet in that moment she felt a surge of gratitude. They had done the impossible, uniting the living against a horror that surpassed all mortal feuds. She thought of all the nights she had spent dreaming of a better world, of how she had freed slaves and toppled tyrants, only to come here and face a threat beyond imagination. And they had won, together. She helped Jon to his feet, supporting him as they made their way back among the exhausted troops. Cheers and sobs mingled in the frosty air. Some men knelt, others simply sank to the ground in relief. Drogon landed with a weary roar, Rhaegal listing to one side, while Viserion circled overhead, finally able to join them. Daenerys felt tears on her cheeks, though she did not remember when they began. It was over. The greatest threat to all life was gone. In the days that followed, the living dug mass graves, burned the corpses of the whites, and tended to the wounded. Snowstorms still raged, but the intangible aura of terror had lifted. Daenerys oversaw the distribution of food to survivors, rationing what little remained until supply lines could be re-established. The freed city's armies helped rebuild broken ramparts and tend to the fallen. Many of her Westerosi soldiers, who had come believing they were following a conqueror, now realized they had served something far greater: the salvation of the realm. Gratitude and respect for Daenerys spread among the ranks, forging an even stronger bond than before. Jon Snow and Daenerys grew closer in the aftermath, sharing the burden of leadership and the sorrow of the many lives lost. Sansa, too, softened toward the Targaryen queen, seeing firsthand that Daenerys had risked everything to protect the north. Brienne of Tarth offered quiet respect, while many of the northern lords, once skeptical, now proclaimed Daenerys' valor. The scars of old grudges would not vanish overnight, but the spirit of unity wrought by the Great War would long outlast the snowdrifts. With the undead threat gone, only one question remained: who would rule Westeros? Cersei still clutched the Iron Throne in King's Landing, presumably gathering new forces while the North fought for survival. Now, however, Daenerys returned to the core of her ambition. She had not come this far, not forged alliances and toppled evils across 2 continents, to let Cersei remain in power. Yet she did not want another bloody war among the living. She wanted to see Westeros truly united under a fair rule. She had proven her might on the battlefield against death itself. Perhaps that was enough to end the cycle of violence if she proceeded wisely. In the war councils that followed, opinions diverged. Some lords urged Daenerys to march south at once and finish Cersei, arguing that any delay would let her scheme. Others, still reeling from the losses, pleaded for time to heal. Tyrion advised negotiation, hoping that the memory of how the living had almost perished might force Cersei to surrender. Jon, loyal as ever, pledged the North would stand with Daenerys if it came to another war, though his eyes betrayed weariness at the thought of more bloodshed. Daenerys herself weighed each perspective. In Essos, she had waged war and freed millions, yet she had also learned the value of alliances that spared endless conflict. Now, with her dragons still recovering, Drogon's wounds, though not fatal, were deep, and Viserion still bore scars. She might not be able to rely on sheer terror to force a swift surrender. And she did not want to reduce King's Landing to ash, as that would betray everything she had fought for. After long deliberation, she settled on a plan reminiscent of her approach in Slaver's Bay: offer Cersei a clear, honorable path to surrender, with terms that benefited the people of King's Landing. If Cersei refused, Daenerys would use her combined forces to lay siege to the capital in a manner that minimized civilian harm, trusting that the memory of the Night King's defeat might galvanize the realm to support her. She knew it was a gamble. Cersei might still choose destruction over surrender. But Daenerys could do no less, and remain true to herself. A new raven was dispatched, summoning Cersei to treat or face the consequences. While they waited, Daenerys lingered in Winterfell, forging bonds with those who had fought beside her. She spoke with Arya Stark, the quiet assassin who had returned from distant lands. She broke bread with the wildlings who told stories of how the free folk had once feared Targaryens, only to stand beside one to defeat the dead. Theon Greyjoy returned, battered but successful in rescuing Yara, who now pledged the Iron Islands to Daenerys if she restored their independence. The realm was shifting, and Daenerys marveled at how much had changed since the day she first set sail from Slaver's Bay. At last, Cersei's reply arrived, carried by an uneasy courier. She would meet Daenerys at the Trident, the historic crossing where Robert Baratheon had once slain Rhaegar Targaryen. Daenerys recognized the significance of that location. Cersei was summoning Targaryen history to the fore, as if reminding everyone of the old war that dethroned Daenerys' family. Yet she accepted. The coalition of Northern and Westerosi troops marched south once more, though at a more measured pace. Winter ravaged the land, but the worst of the undead storms had subsided. Everywhere they passed, people emerged from battered homes, cheering the queen who had saved them from the long night. Daenerys urged them not to starve, offering what provisions she could, though scarcity remained a dire problem. They reached the Trident, a wide river spanned by an ancient stone bridge. Cersei's host waited on the far bank, golden lions on crimson banners stirring in the wind. Daenerys and her retinue halted, forming up in disciplined ranks. She flew in on Drogon, whose wounds had mostly healed, though scars still marred his flank. Jon Snow, Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Varys, and Grey Worm stood with her. On the Lannister side, Cersei arrived in a gilded carriage, escorted by the Mountain, Qyburn, and a host of black-armored knights. Jaime was nowhere to be seen. They met in the middle of the bridge, tension coiling like a viper. Snow dusted the stones, and the wind whistled across the water. Daenerys stood tall in her warm furs and scaled armor, the three-headed dragon sigil gleaming on her chest. Cersei wore a fitted black gown of elaborate design, her crown shining coldly in the pale light. The two queens locked eyes, each weighed by all that had transpired. Cersei's lip curled slightly. "You've defeated the dead. Congratulations. Now you mean to claim the Iron Throne, I suppose." Daenerys spoke evenly, her voice carrying across the hush. "The realm cannot heal with you upon the throne. You've proven time and again that you will not hesitate to harm your own people. Surrender, and I will spare your life. You may live out your days in exile, with enough resources to live comfortably. If you refuse, then I will bring the might of 2 continents down upon you." Cersei laughed, a sharp, mirthless sound. 2 continents? You speak as though you own them both. Or perhaps I should bow at the feet of the so-called breaker of chains, the foreign queen whose father murdered his people with wildfire. That barb stung, but Daenerys refused to rise to it. I am not my father. As you well know, it was your brother who stopped him from burning King's Landing. I will not repeat the Mad King's crimes. But I will end your reign, one way or another. Cersei's gaze flicked over the gathered host, her expression tight. You want me to hand you the kingdom my children died defending. Why would I do that? Jon Snow's voice cut through the tension. Because you have no chance against the united forces of the North, Dorne, the Reach, the Riverlands, and the freed cities. Your mercenaries from the Golden Company won't stand a chance against dragons and a queen who saved the realm from the undead. Enough blood has been spilled. For a moment, Cersei's mask slipped, revealing raw bitterness. My children, she hissed, were everything to me, and they were taken. You speak of saving the realm, but who saved them? She drew a sharp breath, as though trying to regain composure. Fine, if you're so certain of your victory, kill me, but you'll have to take the city by force, and countless innocents will burn. Daenerys shook her head. No, see, I have enough men to surround King's Landing again. Starve it out if necessary. The city is nearly out of food. How many do you think will starve before they rise against you? Nay. Cersei's eyes narrowed. The lines of her face were etched with exhaustion and hatred. You mean to starve the capital again? You're no better than your father. I fed the hungry outside your gates, Daenerys cut in, voice rising. I offered to spare everyone, including you, if you would simply bend the knee for the good of the realm. It is you who refuse to yield, you who cling to power at the cost of innocent lives. She paused, gesturing to the swirling flakes of snow. Winter is here, Cersei. The fields are bare. The people need unity and peace, not more war. Enough. Bend the knee or I swear that I, Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, breaker of chains and queen of the freed cities, will claim what is mine, and no force will stand in my way. Nelichai. Silence crashed upon them like a tidal wave. Cersei's mouth tightened. For a moment, Daenerys thought she might see some glimmer of surrender in those green eyes, but a final spark of defiance remained. I will never bend the knee to you, she spat. You are not worthy of the Iron Throne. Daenerys exhaled slowly, sorrow pressing on her chest. Then may the gods have mercy on King's Landing, because if you will not yield, I will remove you. Without dragonfire if I can, but remove you all the same. Cersei turned on her heel and strode away, the mountain lumbering behind her, Qyburn trailing like a pale shadow. The Lannister knights withdrew, tensions thrumming in the air. Daenerys and Jon, along with their retinue, stood solemnly. Tyrion swallowed, sadness and anger mingling on his face. They knew what came next. King's Landing would face another siege if Cersei would not see reason. This time, Daenerys vowed it would be short, avoiding mass suffering. She would repeat what she had done in Slaver's Bay, break down the gates, dethrone the tyrant, and spare the city from wanton destruction. By the time they returned to Winterfell briefly to finalize preparations, word had spread of the coming conflict. Many lords in the Crownland sent envoys proclaiming their willingness to rise against Cersei from within, provided Daenerys guaranteed no retribution would follow for minor treasons in the past. She agreed. Jaime Lannister was rumored to have fled King's Landing, possibly deserting Cersei altogether. This fracturing of Lannister power meant that half the city might not even resist once Daenerys' armies arrived. Yet she prepared for the worst, recalling how Cersei had once used wildfire to destroy her enemies. It would not be a gentle war, but it would be the last war. After all she had endured, uniting Essos, defeating the undead, Daenerys was determined that no tyrant would remain to corrupt the realm she fought so hard to save. And so, in the final days of Winter's wrath, Daenerys led her armies south once more. She flew on Drogon, with Rhaegal and Viserion soaring behind, all three dragons bearing scars, but exuding lethal grace. The northern banners mingled with those of Dorne, the Reach, and countless other houses. Essosi galleys sailed down the eastern coasts, prepared to blockade the Blackwater for a second time. Despite the biting cold, hope stirred in the hearts of many. They had survived the long night, broken the chains of slavery across the sea, and now marched in unity to forge a new era for Westeros. When the allied host appeared outside King's Landing, they found many of the gates already thrown open by rebel forces within. Lannister loyalists still held the Red Keep, but the bulk of the population did not rise to Cersei's defense. Hunger and fear had worn down their resolve. Daenerys' vanguard entered the city cautiously, ensuring no pockets of resistance endangered civilians. Tyrion guided them through the streets, remembering the old byways he had known from his time as Hand of the King. Dothraki and Unsullied patrolled side by side while northern knights ushered residents indoors to avoid crossfire. It was an invasion, but a strangely subdued one. Near the Red Keep, they met stiffer resistance. A handful of Lannister guards and mercenaries of the Golden Company attempted to hold the walls. Daenerys, not wanting a slaughter, offered them a chance to lay down arms and be spared. Most accepted, dropping weapons and fleeing. A few fought to the death, but their numbers were negligible compared to the unstoppable might arrayed against them. The city, it seemed, had already surrendered in spirit. The final confrontation occurred in the throne room itself. Daenerys, accompanied by Jon, Tyrion, and a phalanx of Unsullied, entered the vast hall where the Iron Throne loomed. Cersei stood at the foot of the throne's dais, the mountain by her side. Her gown was torn, her hair disheveled. She stared at Daenerys with eyes that burned with hatred. The swirling dust of fallen debris coated the floor, shards of stained glass from high windows shattered in the chaos. The dragon's skulls in the shadows reminded Daenerys of her heritage, of why she was here. Tyrion took a step forward, voice trembling with mixed emotions. It's over, Cersei. Lay down your crown, don't make this any worse. Cersei's lips parted in a snarl. She glanced at the mountain, then back at Daenerys. You can kill me, she said, her voice raw. "But know that I will never recognize your claim. You are not the rightful queen. Your father was a monster, and so are you." Daenerys felt a wave of sorrow for the woman who had lost everything: her children, her family, her sense of security. But pity could not change the reality that Cersei was a mortal danger to the realm. "If you will not yield," Daenerys said quietly, "then you stand condemned as a tyrant and a traitor." Cersei's eyes flashed. She reached into the folds of her gown as if clutching for a hidden dagger or a vial of wildfire. Before she could act, the mountain was struck down by Grey Worm and unsullied spears, their coordination swift. The monstrous knight collapsed in a heap, revealing only a horrifically disfigured visage beneath his helm. Cersei screamed in rage. She lunged, but Jon seized her arm, preventing any final desperate act. The throne room fell silent. Tears streaked Cersei's face. Tyrion watched, heartbreak mingling with relief. Daenerys stood tall, her gaze steady. "Take her into custody," she ordered. "We will show mercy to those who surrender. Let her live, so the realm can see that I am not my father." Cersei was dragged away, howling curses. The final threat to Daenerys' ascension was removed, not with fire and blood, but with the inevitability of justice. The bells of King's Landing began to ring, signaling the end of the conflict. People spilled into the streets, uncertain whether to cheer or cower. Word spread that Cersei had been taken alive, that the city had fallen with minimal bloodshed, that the Dragon Queen who had defeated the undead now held the capital. In the days that followed, Daenerys addressed the populace from the steps of the Red Keep, flanked by the banners of House Targaryen and the freed cities. She promised them a new era: no more tyranny, no more starvation. She vowed to rebuild the city's infrastructure, to feed the poor, to reward lords who served the common good rather than their own greed. She announced that the practice of forcing criminals into life servitude would be abolished, drawing on her hatred of slavery in Essos. She offered the realm a chance to gather in a great council, to shape the laws by which Westeros would be governed. Some found it radical, others a breath of hope. Tyrion, named Hand of the Queen, stood by her side, already envisioning the realm's reformation. Varys, behind the scenes, knitted fragile alliances among the great houses. Jon Snow, the king in the north, pledged friendship and cooperation, forging a bond that would unite North and South as equals. When at last Daenerys ascended the Iron Throne, cautiously, as if fearing it might burn her, she felt the weight of years press upon her. She remembered standing in Pentos, a frightened girl sold to a Dothraki khal. She recalled the smoldering ruins of slaver strongholds in Essos, the negotiations with Braavos, Lys, Myr, and the final toppling of Volantis. She pictured the burning fields of the north, the face of the Night King as he shattered, Jon's unwavering courage, her dragons roaring to the sky. Now she was here, the first Targaryen to rule since her father. But this time it would be different. She had changed the world once already by uniting the free cities and ending slavery across a continent. She would change Westeros too, breaking the wheel of feudal oppression and forging a realm that would stand for all. The swords that made up the throne pressed into her back as she sat, sharp edges reminding her that rule was never easy. She was not naive enough to think the realm's troubles were gone. Famine, bandits, rebellious lords, all these challenges remained. Yet she had the loyalty of two continents, the memory of how they had fought and won together, and the unwavering determination to see her vision through. Outside, crowds roared in cautious celebration. Soldiers from Essos and Westeros alike mingled, sharing tales of the war against the dead and the final triumph over Cersei's reign. Children pointed to the dragons circling overhead, not in terror, but in awe. Daenerys Targaryen closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the people wash over her. Then she opened them again, her voice steady as she addressed the court. "The past is full of blood and horror. We must learn from it, or be consumed by it again. Today, I swear to be a queen worthy of the realm, to rule not by fear but by justice and mercy. Let us build a future where all are free. Let us build a future where..." Thus began a new chapter in the history of Westeros. The queen who had united the free cities before turning her gaze west had broken chains across two continents, led a grand alliance that destroyed the undead and deposed the last great tyrant of the Seven Kingdoms without igniting another slaughter. The scars of war would linger, and many trials lay ahead. But if ever a ruler had proven capable of forging unity out of chaos, it was Daenerys Stormborn, who had turned slavers into allies, overcame the horrors of winter, and took the Iron Throne to bring about a new dawn for the realm. In the following months and years, she strove to heal the wounds left by centuries of feudal strife, inviting representatives from all major houses to help form a council that would ensure fair governance. Food was shipped from the Reach and Dorne to feed the starving in King's Landing. The Iron Islands gained partial autonomy under Yara Greyjoy, paying homage to the crown while governing themselves. Dorne and the North retained privileges reflecting their distinct cultures, forging a tapestry of regional identities under the Targaryen banner. Meanwhile, trade between Westeros and the freed cities flourished, regulated by new laws banning the slave trade in any form. The Braavosi bankers found stable loans in the queen who honored her debts. Pentos, Lys, and Mar enjoyed profitable exchanges of goods and knowledge with their western counterparts. A new age of cooperation dawned across the narrow sea. Daenerys, for her part, found solace in her dragons, who soared in the skies of Westeros as symbols of might and renewal rather than instruments of terror. She tasked them with patrolling the coasts and preventing pirate raids, forging a sense of wonder among the people who glimpsed them overhead. The Dothraki, so alien to Westerosi ways, formed a respected cavalry corps that roamed the plains, ensuring lawless brigands found no safe haven. The Unsullied, many of whom chose to settle in the newly built fortresses or marry into local communities, became paragons of discipline and justice. Though the assimilation was not without friction, Daenerys' leadership and the shared history of the Great War against the undead created a bond that transcended old fears. Cersei Lannister, stripped of power, stood trial before a gathered assembly of lords, knights, and commoners. Her crimes were catalogued, from the destruction of the Great Sept to her betrayal of the truce that nearly cost the realm its victory against the dead. She showed no remorse. Some demanded her execution, but Daenerys, remembering the tyranny of her father, chose exile. Cersei was sent across the sea with provisions to live out her days in a remote corner of Essos, watched over by guards sworn to ensure she never returned. Whether she perished in bitterness or carved a life in foreign lands remained a mystery to most. Bit by bit, the realm stabilized. Winters in Westeros were harsh, but with the undead destroyed, the wheel of seasons would turn again. Spring would eventually melt the snow and Daenerys' new order would face the test of prosperity. She devoted herself to the work of governance, surrounding herself with wise advisors, Tyrion as Hand, Sansa as Warden of the North, Olenna Tyrell's chosen successors in the Reach, and the Dornish princes forging new treaties. Jon Snow, who had never craved power, returned to the North as its protector, traveling often to King's Landing for counsel. Whispers spread of a blossoming affection between the Queen and the King in the North, though both rarely spoke of it openly, too mindful of the burdens they carried. Standing on a balcony of the Red Keep one bright morning, Daenerys gazed out at the city below. The scars of war were fading, scaffolding rose around new buildings, and ships laden with goods from the freed cities lined the harbor. Her dragons circled overhead, roaring like thunder in the azure sky. She reflected on the impossible journey that had led her here, uniting Essos, toppling the slave trade, forging alliances with proud free cities, conquering her homeland in a far kinder way than her ancestors ever had, defeating the Night King alongside a man called Snow. It felt surreal, like a tapestry woven of prophecy and choice. She had never expected to succeed so fully, yet here she was, crowned by the people's hope rather than fear. Missandei approached her quietly, carrying a scroll. "Your Grace," she said, a smile lighting her eyes. "A message from Pentos. The Magisters wish to know if you will attend the next trade summit in person. They've requested your presence to finalize new shipping routes." Daenerys smiled. "They've come a long way since Illyrio Mopatis first introduced me to the idea of marriage as a means of power. Tell them I will consider it. I want them to see that Westeros is not a mere partner but an equal, that the freed cities stand with us in harmony." Missandei inclined her head and made a note. "They've also requested more details on your new laws banning indentured servitude. It seems some Pentoshi merchants are eager to reshape their practices for compliance." Daenerys nodded. "Good. Aye. We must ensure that freedom is not just a word, but a reality." I've seen too much suffering to allow even a shadow of slavery to remain. Nani, now, Andi got her. She took the scroll, gazing at it for a moment before looking out again at the city. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries mingling with the hum of reconstruction. Far beyond the horizon stretched Essos, the vast continent she had once called home. She felt a pang of nostalgia for Meereen, for the warm winds of Slaver's Bay. For the first time she had called herself a queen in front of a freed people. But now Westeros was her realm, and her responsibility. The sea bridged the two lands, a testament to the unity she had forged. The freed cities, once fractious centers of slave markets, now thrived under her allied banner, each proud yet invested in a shared destiny. She hoped that one day, the children of Westeros and Essos would read in their histories that a dragon queen had joined them, not through conquest alone, but through compassion and justice. Her heart swelled with both pride and humility. She had made mistakes, lost friends and loved ones along the way, tasted despair more than once. But each trial had tempered her resolve. Leaning on the balcony rail, she whispered to herself, "We are building a world free of chains." And though she spoke quietly, in her mind, the echo of her vow resonated across two continents, bridging the seas, binding the future to the hope of the present. She closed her eyes, breathing in the promise of a new dawn, and silently thanked all the souls who had bled so she could stand here. A queen who had changed the course of history on both sides of the world, forging unity where once there had been only fear, and hope where once despair had reigned.